And we ended talking about dual agency and designated dual agency. And so I think this is a great, we're going to Kahoot in a minute, but not yet. Don't look. Um, I think this is a great place to kind of start because it'll allow us to go back and recap and review, revisit a few things. So these bullet points, most of these should be for you in your book, page 163, 164. So no secrets here. But just to kind of refresh, remind me, everybody, you can hold your hand up and remind me. In dual agency, how many, I'll give you all the answer. In dual agency, how many firms are involved? Dual agency is how many firms? Everybody can show me. Dual agency is one firm. Okay, hands down or hand down. In dual agency, how many transactions? Transactions in dual agency. One transaction. You threw me off guard. In dual agency, how many clients? Two clients. Bonus question. In dual agency, how many customers? Zero. Good job, guys. So dual agency, again, the most basic breakdown I can offer you with dual agency is one firm, one transaction, two clients. Both seller and buyer have hired the same firm to help them sell and buy the same property. That's what we mean by one transaction. It's the same property. The seller is selling this property. The buyer wants to buy that property. And the firm is represented both buyer and seller in the transaction. Designated dual agency is a form of dual agency. It's so important that we understand if we do have the opportunity to become designated, dual doesn't go away. The firm and all the other agents are going to remain in dual. It's only the two agents that have been designated. So remember, we got dual agency and you got the firm straddling the wall that separates buyer and seller. And the firm and all the agents in the firm are straddling that wall. And we enter into designated, and the BIC is going to kick one of you off the wall to hang out over here with the buyer, exclusively represent the buyer. And then the BIC is going to kick another one of you off the wall to hang out over here with the seller and exclusively eliminate or exclusively represent the seller. The only two that are designated are those two agents that have been kicked off the wall. Those two brokers have been kicked off the wall. And by doing that, that brings exclusivity back into it. That allows the agents to become advocates and offer advice. Remember our football game. You go back to being the coach. But the important thing to remember is that that wall is still there. And the broker, the firm, all of the agents in the firm, except for the two that have been designated, are still straddling that wall. So in designated, dual agency doesn't go away. It's not eliminated. Designated as a form of dual, as we saw in our listing agreement on Tuesday. I can't get consent to designated if I don't first have consent to do dual. If one party won't budge and won't do dual, designated is not even an option. Now we can say, if you got people hemming and hawing and they're saying, well, I don't know, you say, okay, so here's a possible, if your firm allows designated and the other side agrees to it, then we may be able to do designated, but there's still a couple pieces there that has to happen. So designated doesn't eliminate dual. In-house transactions, in-house situations, meaning one firm. We have to have dual. There's that intentionally created with informed written consent. Intentionally created with informed written consent. I have to have written approval of both parties no later than the time we're ready to make the offer. Written approval by both parties no later than the time make the offer. And just a bit, we've kind of danced around. We do have a situation where we may be able to act as an oral agent in an oral agency agreement, in which case we can get an oral consent to do dual. But bottom line, it's got to be put in writing no later than making the first offer. More on that in just a bit. The individual agent, one on the buyer side, one on the selling side, they're going to act. There's that exclusivity. That exclusivity comes back. Once you've been designated, once you've been kicked off the wall, those two agents might as well proceed as if they were two different firms. Now advocacy comes back. Now exclusivity comes back. The firm should have a company policy about how they're going to handle, if they're going to offer designated, and how they're going to handle it. It used to be back in the day, before the world of the internet, and all our files were kept in file cabinets in the file room. Anybody remember the file room? It's not near as much fun as what it sounds. So, so all those files, all that paperwork and the agency agreement and everything was in the file room. One thing that was recommended for firms to have in their policy was who has access to that file room. Like, can either one of these agents come in the middle of the night and get in the file room and look at the other side's files? So keeping those things under lock and key. Fast forward to today, most firms use electronic transactions, electronic documents, so security is definitely heightened. But still, they should have a policy in place about how they're going to protect their clients' confidential information in designated dual agency, and also on how the BIC is going to designate. They may just straight up ask you, do you know something about the other side that could harm them in this transaction? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you guys go to church together. Maybe your kids play together. Maybe you did a transaction, real estate transaction with them a couple years ago. Doesn't matter. If you know something that could harm the other side, the BIC won't be able to designate you. They would have to find somebody else in the firm to handle that. So company policy is recommended. It's not required. It's recommended. You may not be able to be appointed if you do have prior confidential information about the other side. Remember, you're getting kicked off the wall, one side or the other. And we need to make sure, the BIC needs to make sure before we go any further, that you don't have any confidential information about the other side. And if you do, you may be asked to step aside from the transaction, because remember, you guys, and always remember, agency is what's best for the client, not you, not the firm. It's what's best for the client. It is all about the client. Dual agency is what's best for the firm, because I got two clients with similar interests, opposing interests, right? Seller wants to sell high, buyer wants to buy low. And the firm has kind of been stuck in the middle of trying to decide how they can handle both. So dual happens to allow the firm to handle this transaction. Really, it's in the best interest of the clients, though, isn't it? The seller wants to sell this house, the buyer wants to buy. So now the question becomes, how can the firm handle that? How can the firm best represent both? And the only thing they can do is informed written consent and have both parties, or have those both agents, step back and not offer that advocacy. It's best for the firm because it allows the seller to sell and the buyer to buy this transaction. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do that. This last one here is, again, probably the biggest problem topic. One of the bigger problem topics in Unit 7. The broker in charge cannot be designated opposite of the provisional broker. You guys are the soon-to-be provisional broker. You're my brokers with training wheels. Your BIC is your training wheels. Your BIC is the whole reason you can ride your bike, ride your real estate bike, if you will. So because of the nature of your relationship, the two cannot be designated opposite of each other. Shake your head, yes or no. Can BIC and BP be in dual? Wish I had more people shaking your head, yes or no. Go out on a limb. What do you think? Can the BIC and PB be in dual? The answer is yes, because in dual, the firm and all of the agents are straddling the wall. Here's our problem topic. In dual agency, the firm and everybody in the firm affiliated with the firm is straddling the wall. That's right. What we're saying, what we're emphasizing is that the BIC and the PB can't be designated. You cannot kick the BP off one side of the wall and the BIC off the other side of the wall. Is everybody with me? Any other relationship can be designated as long as they don't come into the transaction with prior confidential information about the other side. BICs could be designated opposite of a full broker, a non-provisional broker. Some BICs choose not to take that because let's face it, the BIC has access to all of the records, all of the files, no matter where they are. If they're in a file cabinet or if they're stored on the cloud, BIC has access. So that's going to be up to the BIC and possibly the firm's policy. That's not what you're going to be tested on. What you're going to be tested on is what the Real Estate Commission says. The Real Estate Commission says any other relationship is allowed as long as either party doesn't have prior confidential information about the other. Questions? So the last piece of this section, we looked at it, page 164. We just kind of talked briefly about agency relationships because this section, this is what this section is about, is agency relationships, but specifically in rentals. So we're going to get more into the property manager, their relationship to the owner of the property. Very rarely does dual agency happen in rentals. If the tenant is represented, they're going to come from another firm for the most part. Yes, there are exceptions to that. That's not firm, but very rarely is they're going to be dual agency and rentals. Like we said the other day, tenants in a residential transaction are very rarely represented. Where you see tenants represented is going to be in a commercial transaction. So that finished that section up, and that whole section. I want to go back to the beginning, back to page 153. Again, I encourage you guys to pay attention to the graphs, the pictures, I call them, because I think that they help kind of simplify things a little bit. So 163 just gives you the type of agency relationship. We talked about single agency, we talked about sub-agency, we talked about dual agency, but it just kind of gives you a nice little summary of what we talked about. Questions? All right, let's Kahoot. Let's do a quick Kahoot. Kind of get us warmed up a little bit. This Kahoot is from Unit 7, things we have covered so far, and this is all true and false. So if nothing else, you got a 50-50 shot. So there's your QR code for this Kahoot. The easiest, fastest way to get it. I gotta, Kahoot music is like the worst music. I can't. Okay. If you're going on the website or the app, you need a PIN. That PIN is 5949159 for this Kahoot. And before we leave tonight, I got a couple other resources I'm going to share with you guys. Again, providing you with the material, several different avenues to help you wrap your brains around this information. This will give us a nice recap. See how we're doing before we wrap up unit 7. Definitely getting through unit 7 tonight. Is everybody in that wants to play on your phone? Remember, I don't make you play on your phone, but if you don't want to play on your phone, I just ask that you play here, see how you're doing. In? All right, all true and false or false. Let's see what we got. Question number 1. Fiduciary is a relationship based on trust. Six seconds. Fiduciary is a relationship based on trust. That's the whole basis behind it. When the principal hires us, they should trust that we have their best interest in mind. They should trust that what we do is for them. Remember, you guys, agency isn't about you and I. Agency is about the client and what's best for the client. Questions on this one? Let's see who got it right the fastest. Chrissy's out the gate. Followed by first try, Tink, Suze, and Ashley Bagley. Question number 2. Agency is defined by consumers based on their expectations and experiences. Seconds. Yeah, no. Could you imagine the chaos if the consumer got to decide how they wanted to be treated and what they thought it was about? It'd be madness, I tell you. Agency comes from, we talked about the common law of agency, court law, whenever somebody goes to somebody, we probably get another rule of law. And then specifically license law and commission rules. So agency, the law of agency, the common law of agency comes from several different sources, not from the consumer. Questions on this one? That didn't budge. So Chrissy, first try, Tink, Suze, and Ashley Bagley. Well, that didn't budge. It didn't even update scores. Weird. Let's see what happens next. Question number 3. In North Carolina, licensees may act as transactional brokers. Four seconds. In North Carolina, we cannot act as transactional brokers. That is false. Remind me again, and you can show me. And a transactional broker, also known as a facilitator broker, how many clients are in the transaction? How many clients? 0. 0 clients. How many customers? 2. In order for me to be involved in a transaction, somebody has to be hired. It may not be me, it may be the other agent. But if we have a transaction where no agents are hired, you and I cannot facilitate. And you know they want us because we come with the paperwork and we're a lot cheaper than attorneys. So I think this question comes up frequently, that if nobody is willing to hire you or any agent for that matter in North Carolina, we can't get involved. The only way we can be involved is if somebody is hired. Questions on this one?
What's the definition of a transactional broker?
It's a broker that facilitates the transaction. That's their whole purpose, is they're all about getting the transaction from point A to point B. So you're facilitating it, or you're helping, aiding in the transaction, not the people, because nobody is your client.
Isn't that the one that's either prohibited or illegal or something like that?
It is.
Okay.
That's why this is false. In North Carolina, we cannot act as facilitators, transactional brokers, also known as facilitator brokers. Other questions on this one? Let's see what our scoreboard's doing. Huh. I don't know, guys. It's not updating you. Sorry. I know Hannah's the highest climber of 3, answer streak of 3. You're all winners tonight. How about that? All right, let's see. Question number 4. An agent must be loyal and obedient to a customer. Five seconds. Loyal and obedient to a customer. Customer, who gets obedience and loyalty? The client. How do you become my client? You hire me by entering into an agency agreement. The client's in first class with OCAR. The customer's back in coach with what? Let's rattle it off together. The customer gets honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. That's not what I call rattling it off together. The customer, everybody gets honesty, fairness, thank you, and the disclosure of material facts. Client gets OCAR. See what they like to do to you guys? The client gets OCAR. They get that first class treatment. The customer's back in coach with honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. You should get something when you hire me, right? You should get something more than those that don't hire me. And that's what we're doing. We're giving you loyal and obedience, confidentiality, because you entrusted me, because you hired me. Questions on this one? Let's see. Still not shuffling. You need to make me a note. Check out my Kahoot, see what's going on. But let's see, 13 of you have gotten 3 in a row. You're on fire. And I think, oh, number 5, dual agency involves 2 firms helping buyers and sellers through a transaction. Five seconds. Good job. What's wrong with this one? What makes it false? I'm seeing the number 2 held up. How many firms in dual agency? Just one. One word, or in this case, one number, can change the whole meaning of the question, right? Everything else is okie doke, but that one word changed the meaning of everything. So no, dual agency is not 2 firms, it is one firm. one transaction, two clients. Questions on this one? Oh, did, okay. First try is on top now. Sue's is up. Chrissy's still on the board. Ashley Bagley in the machine. Tanya is our highest climber, up 11 places. And our last one, in this Kahoot, in agency, the principal does not owe any duties to the agent broker. Six seconds. Principal does not owe any duties to broker. That's right. That's false. It's a two-way street. Our agency agreements are referred to as a bilateral contract, which we're actually going to define that word in Unit 9. What a bilateral contract means is that both parties have duties and obligations to each other. The firm has duties to the principal has duties to the firm. Specifically, the principal's duties to the firm are to act in good faith. They can't hinder my efforts, and they're going to ensure I get paid. Maybe they're the one paying me, maybe they're the one not, but they're going to ensure that I get paid. So they do owe duties to us. It is a two-way street. Questions on this one? I don't know how the podium results are going to work out, but they are going to roll with them. So third place is Chrissy with her sunglasses. Our second place is Sue's. And our first place is first try. I got runners up, Ashley and the machine. Questions? Is that a good review, a good refresh? Good. Again, you guys, we're moving on Unit 7 tonight. We're getting into Unit 8. You all are still going to be tested in Unit 7 in what, month and a half, something like that. So even though we're done with Unit 7 tonight, I need you guys to keep going back and reviewing it. So with that being said, let me share a couple other resources with you. I am in the online learning system. And if we look in the Unit 7 material, one thing we have, remember we saw those summary of important points for material facts? We also have a summary of important points for agency. So again, most of what we've talked about kind of put in a nice, neat bullet point outline for you. So there's that. Okay. Another thing I want to introduce you guys to, the very last section we do in this class is license law and commission rule. And it's our state specific section. And the good news is by the time we get there, we've mentioned or touched on a good portion of it. So license law and commission rule, we're like learning as we go. And then when we get in the end, we're going to have one nice, neat little package for it. The bulk of the license law and commission rule, again, I'm on the online learning system, and there's a tab just for license law and commission rule. And the bulk of it comes, here we go. We put the actual license law and commission rule in here. Anybody ever sat down and tried to read law before, rule before? Whew, it's tough. I'm not saying don't look over this. I'm not asking you to. I don't think it can hurt to peruse through it. What I'm asking you guys to do is the one right underneath it, and it's license law and rule comments. So it takes all that legal jargon and it puts it more in maybe everyday speak, everyday language. The comments are a much easier read than sitting down trying to read law and rule. When we get to this section, most of this section is going to come from the comments. I think you guys should start reading this now, because even though it is everyday verbiage, it still comments on law and rule, and it's a lot to take in. So somewhere between now and the end of class, when we get to this section, I think you guys should start looking through this now. I would break it down, do it a section at a time. I mean, it's only 23 pages, but it's not an easy read. I'll put that out there. So if you start now, break it down. Have you guys ever heard the expression, how do you eat an elephant? You know how you eat an elephant? Yeah, just one bite at a time, right? So ladies and gentlemen, this is your elephant. And I do encourage you to take this one bite at a time. Part of the reason I'm introducing this to you now is to give you an opportunity to read it before we get here. But the other thing I want to just scroll through and show you guys, and you don't have to try to follow along, it's all in here, I promise. Let me just show you, when we scroll around a little bit and we start seeing things like material facts. And under material facts, we start talking about willful misrepresentation and negligent misrepresentation and willful omission and negligent omission. And there are different examples here than what you have in Unit 7. So you can see other scenarios to help you understand what we call the Big Four, the prohibited conducts. Remember those additional duties we kind of went through pretty quickly the other day, because we said we're going to see them again at the end. Here's our making false promises with examples, self-dealing with examples. So those additional duties we're going to spend a little bit more time on in the end, has examples. I like the examples because the scenarios help make it real for us. And it's a lot easier than reading definitions. Keep going a little bit further. Here's our agency agreements and disclosure. We're getting ready to talk about our disclosure now. Agency agreements are coming up in Unit 8. We're going to talk about, look, it talks a little bit about, where is it? Dual agency, here it is, consent to dual agency. Dual agency is practiced by the firm. So not a lot, but some of this stuff we've already talked about. And like I said, by the time we get to the end, there's not much left in here that we have to go over. So it's a really good review, but in order to review, you need to expose yourself to it beforehand. So again, I'm in the license, law, and commission rule section, tab, I should call it. And there is a folder. I'm in license, law, and commission rule, and it is specific, the comments. And I would encourage you guys to please start looking this over now. And you're going to see a lot of familiar stuff in here. Now, more to come. Questions on that? Comments on the comments? Back up in Unit 7, where we're heading next, we got to talk about our agency disclosure, our disclosure status in agency. And I think this section is best by just starting to look at the form. This is the form that we introduce to the consumers when we're disclosing our agency status. Bear with me. We're going to look at the form and then we'll go back, pick up the PowerPoint so we can get the detailed information. But the form does a really good job of discussing it, what it's about. So at the top, you see we got one for the sellers. I also got one for the buyers. That's actually page 2. So it depends on who you're talking to, possible buyers or sellers. So you're meeting a consumer for the first time. And I have a duty to disclose my agency status. Remind me what it means to disclose. See, Mouse?
To tail.
So if I'm disclosing my agency status to the consumer, what am I doing? I'm telling the consumer, this is where I stand in this transaction. This is where I stand in this relationship. And it starts by saying this is required for all sales transactions That does include residential and commercial. And then for the consumer, it starts with a big box called important. First thing we're going to say is this form is not a contract. I'm not creating agency. I'm disclosing agency. I'm giving you the heads up. I'll create agency with our agency agreement, maybe, if we make it that far. But this is well before we've made it that far. This form is not a contract. Signing this disclosure only means you've received it. In a real estate sales transaction, it's important that you understand whether an agent represents you. That's an interesting use, an interesting word right there. Not me, not you, just any agent. Does an agent represent you in the transaction? Real estate agents are required to review this form with you at first substantial contact. We will spend time on first substantial contact before asking for or receiving your confidential information, and give you a copy of the form after you sign it. This form is for your own protection, consumer. This is a consumer protection form. This last bullet point, this third bullet point really hits home, doesn't it? Consumer, do not share any confidential information with a real estate agent or assume that the agent is acting on your behalf until you have entered into a written agreement with the agent to represent you. Otherwise, the agent can share your confidential information with others. Remember, I don't owe you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. If you never decide to hire me, I never owe you that confidentiality. That's that old card. Isn't it only fair that the consumer is warned about that they're told about that we have a duty to our client? And that's all we're doing with this, is protecting the consumer. And we come down a little bit further. We have a note to the agent, check all relationship type below that may apply to the seller. This is the seller's version. And what we have here is a brief little description on seller's agency, dual agency, designated dual agency, and then buyers working with an unrepresented seller, also known as a for sale by owner. I think you guys should read this because it gives you another explanation of dual and designated agency. The agent's role with this piece of it is to disclose to the consumer the types of agency that the firm offers. I'm giving you our menu. I'm telling you, my firm will work with you as a seller's agent, a dual agent. Oh, we don't offer designated dual agency. We're not going to check that box. So we're not creating the relationship. I'm not telling you how we're going to work. I'm just telling you what I have available should you decide you want to hire me. For more information, see the North Carolina Real Estate Commission's Q&A brochure on working with real estate agents. We'll see that next. We get the sellers to sign, and then the agent's going to jot down their name, their license number, and the firm name. Somehow I got to keep a copy for my records. Somehow we got to get a copy to them for their records. Maybe you take a picture of it for your records. Maybe you run around with 2 copies. There's no wrong way to do that, just so long as you retain one for your records and you have one for them. The second version then is for the buyers. So again, this is similar. I don't owe you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. But the big difference here is the type of agency that the firm may offer. So buyer agency, there's dual agency and designated dual agency again. And then do we have the possibility? Will my firm allow you to work with a non-represented buyer? If you're a non-represented buyer, that makes me a seller sub-agent. Is it a possibility? I don't know. That's going to be up to your firm, but that's what we're disclosing to the consumer. These are my possibilities of working with you. Once we do this and we proceed, we'll determine in what capacity we're going to work. But again, you guys, I'm just telling the consumer, it's like giving them a menu. These are the items that my firm has to offer. So that's the form. We'll talk about it next. But before I do that, right under that is the Q&A brochure. Now, this is the flat PDF. You can get these for free from the commission's website. You can also buy, it's like a nice glossy and it folds out. It's about this long. It folds out several different panels. Maybe your firm will buy it for you. Maybe you got to, I don't know, but always know you got flat PDF versions. If you're frugal like me, you can always offer the flat PDF. But this is something we can put in the consumer's hands to help them better understand agency in North Carolina. So remember what we said the other day. A common concern I hear from newbies, from you guys when you just get started is, I don't know what to say. And I'm such a big fan of being familiar with the forms and the documents and the Q&A brochures that are provided to you. If we're familiar what's in here, it'll help you put words in your mouth. Don't read this to them. Nobody wants that. Don't just hand it to them and say, here you go, read this. But it allows us, it helps us to put words in our mouth so we can have these conversations. Y'all don't need to create the wheel. The wheel has already been created. And when you're explaining agency to the consumer, this is a fantastic tool. So again, we talk about this, don't share anything confidentiality with me. Important, I'll let you guys read this. It defines agency. What is an agency agreement? I'm just going fast, I know, because you guys need to spend some time with this. And then it gets into Q&A specifically for sellers. So when you're talking to a potential seller, maybe you're trying to get a listing and you're talking to a potential seller, this is the section you focus on because it explains agency as it relates to the seller. Once we talk to the seller, then we got a Q&A section just for buyers. So you tailor these conversations depending on who you're talking to and what scenario you're talking to. Of course, getting them the whole brochure. Both of them also talk about dual agency. Yeah, here it is, dual agency. So again, here's yet another resource for you guys to expose yourself to this information. You can see it from a slightly different angle. Now we're explaining dual agency to the consumer. And termination of agency agreements, that's the last piece of it. So again, I encourage you guys to look at these Q&A brochures, specifically the ones that we have in the online learning system. But this is where we're heading next. Ooh. Let's see, we did that. So our working with real estate agent disclosure, WWREA, working with real estate agent disclosure. The whole point of that was to make sure that the consumer, let's stop on that word. Does that say client? Does that say customer? That says consumer. When do you think this happens? Early. We're not
At
even.
first initial contact.
There we go. Yes, at first substantial contact. That's right. Very, very early in our communicating, in our conversations. Maybe you'll go on to be a client. Maybe you'll go on to be a customer. Maybe I'll never see you again. Doesn't matter. I have a duty to disclose my agency status to the consumer as soon as possible and let them know I don't owe you confidentiality until that agency relationship is created, until and if you decide to hire me. Guys, we are all consumers. We may not be out there every day buying houses, but we are all consumers. And have you ever been a consumer in a situation where you feel taken advantage of, you feel deceived, you feel like the salesman was trying to get one over on you? Anybody? That's what we're trying to avoid. Working with real estate agents. Working with real estate agents. This gives us an opportunity to tell the consumer, I don't know you confidentiality, and talk about those agency options. What does your firm provide? Do we offer dual agency, designated dual agency, and determine how we're going to proceed. The disclosure as mentioned is mandatory with sales transactions. Does that say lease transactions? Let's go back to the property manager. Does that say lease transactions? No. only sales. Thus, when you see an answer choice on one of your test questions that said it's required with all transactions, what do we think about that? Is it required with all? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Not all, just sales. Residential sales and commercial sales. Are you talking to buyers or sellers? It's not required with lease. Thus, it's not required in all transactions. Denise told us, thank you, Denise. That did my heart good. We have a duty to provide and review this thing at something referred to as first substantial contact in these sales transactions. So again, let's break this bullet point down. Provide and review. Does that mean you're going to hand it to them and say, we have to do this, just sign here? You provided it to them. Did you review it with them? There are two pieces. We have to have this conversation. At first substantial contact, what do we think of when we see the word? What does the word substantial mean to you?
Significant.
Significant. Yep.
I would say when it's kind of appropriate, I would think.
Kind of appropriate.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
substance.
Like I wouldn't do it at a party. You know, it's just kind of, I guess I
Hey, you know what? Welcome to real estate. You might be on all the time. If you wear your name tag to that party, you are on. But when we think of substantial, it's something of substance. It's a conversation of substance about real estate, about this transaction, about buying, about selling, about, that's right, at an open house. Just because we meet a consumer does not mean we need to automatically bombard them with this working with real estate agent disclosure. We could talk about the icky weather we've had all day. What did I just learn about you as it relates to this transaction? We all get a little blue when it rains. That's what I learned about you. Does that affect your buying or selling decision? What if you want to share with me what you had for lunch today? Is that something substantial about this transaction? When we say substantial, we're talking about this transaction. Somebody in the chat said at an open house. So let's say it's Sunday and you're doing an open house and a couple comes into your open house and you say, hey folks, how are you today? And they say, oh, we're pretty good. We're just kind of out kicking tires. We just wonder if we could run through real quick and see. Absolutely, come on in. That's why we do an open house, right? The more in, the merrier. Maybe they're interested, maybe they're not. Couple goes through the house, they come back out. I say, what do y'all think? And they're like, nah, I don't know. We're just looking around. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. And then they leave my open house. What did I learn about them? Other than the fact that they're out and about driving around on a Sunday afternoon looking at houses. Does that mean anything?
No.
No. What about if that same or a different couple now comes into your open house and they walk in and people love to talk. It blows my mind. Have you ever had a complete stranger come up to you in public and just start sharing their life story with you? And you're like, who is this person? That's people. That's what people do. So now the second couple comes into your open house and they're like, oh, this is nice. We got to buy something within the next couple months because we're coming here from a job relocation. Did you just learn something about them? What do you know? You know why they're moving. You know that they have to buy soon. You know why they're buying. You know more about them than you should at this point. The rule says that we have this duty to stop them from talking. In a perfect world, we could see first substantial contact coming and do our working with real estate agent disclosure before first substantial contact. Do we live in a perfect world? No. Sometimes we've got to be prepared. Sometimes we have to be on alert, like at an open house. Let's say, for example, let's back up a little bit. You're getting ready for a listing appointment and you're getting your stuff together. You know you're meeting with the seller tomorrow, and fingers crossed, you're going to get this listing. We're going to talk about that in Unit 8. You know you're going to sit in that seller's home and ask them questions. You know you're going to sit in that seller's home and the seller's going to volunteer and share information. You know this because that's why you're going to this listing appointment. That is an example of when we can do our working with real estate agent disclosure before we hit first substantial contact. You show up for that listing appointment, the seller wants to give you the grand tour, and within the grand tour is pointing out the stain on the ceiling and the crack in the foundation, right? That's just all comes with the tour, right? We need to slow that roll a little bit, you guys, before we do anything. Thank you for having me come over. Let's sit down at the kitchen table or dining room table and let's, do this in a certain order. And that certain order is going to be that first substantial contact, doing our working with real estate agent disclosure. What if you're meeting buyers for a buyer consultation? You're going to ask them questions. They're going to volunteer information. Those are those times that we can be prepared. We know first substantial contact is going to hit, and we can do our working with real estate agent disclosure before first substantial contact. That's not always possible because people talk. So let's go back to the open house. You've already been hired by the seller. You're there as a representative of the seller to sell their house. People will walk in the door and just start talking. People will call you. People will email you. I had a listing a couple years ago and they called off the sign and another agent answered and she answered, thank you for calling. How may I help you? And the lady said, I'm calling about 123 Main Street and I'm pre-approved for X amount. Did I just learn something about her, about this transaction? We didn't even know her name yet, but we knew what she was pre-approved for. Could that harm her negotiating power? If she came in under that, what would I have to tell my seller? Counter, she can pay more, right? My coworker said, whoa, you got to understand what you just did. And she said, I tell you, you're like the third firm I've called and nobody took the time to explain that to me. So thank you very much. I get what she was doing, you guys. I get it. She was proving to us that she was a serious buyer. Serious enough that she's already talked to a lender and she's got a pre-approval. But do you see how she could have harmed herself had she moved forward with that transaction? We've got to be on alert. So somebody said something about being at a party, and I'm sorry, it was on a different screen, so I didn't get to see who that was. We've got to be on alert. If you're running around acting like an agent, maybe you're wearing your name tag everywhere you go. Some of your firms, when you join, will say wear your name tag. So when you're in the grocery store on your way home, you want somebody to come up to you in the grocery store and start talking about real estate, right? If you're out promoting yourself as an agent, if you're acting in the capacity as an agent, you got to be on alert for somebody coming up to you in the cereal aisle and having a conversation about how they want to buy or sell a house. We've got to be on alert for first substantial contact. That first substantial contact between the agent and the consumer, still the consumer, where either start to act as though agency relationship exists. When the consumer starts disclosing confidential information about this transaction, or when the agent starts asking confidential information. Once we're disclosing or asking, we've passed first substantial contact. At some point, we may have to interrupt people. People just start talking. We got to be prepared to say, whoa. Please stop talking. Because I need you to understand what you're doing. I need you to understand the position you're putting yourself in. Again, the rule says before or at the time of first substantial contact, but we got to be prepared to stop people as well. So we have our agency status. Before that conversation, we can talk about the property all day long. But as soon as we start talking about the consumer, we need to be on alert. Typically speaking, with the consumer, what we're on alert for, I always think of PTM. Price, term, and motive. If the seller starts sharing what they want to sell for, what they want to net, if the buyer starts sharing how low or how high, I should say, they're willing to go. What's their terms? Do they have a certain day that they have to close by? Do they have a time frame? And then their motive for selling, their motive for buying. The whole point of this is to protect the consumer and warn them, caution them. And this is what we have to be alert on for. Now, I got a lot more to say about this, but I also know we got to take a break. So take a pause. We come back, we'll keep going on our working with real estate agent disclosure. welcome back. Cameras are coming on. Take attendance. By the way, the working with real estate agent disclosure and that Q&A brochure are also in your books in Unit 7. So you got two different, same thing, but you can either pull it from the online learning system or in your book, whichever is easier for you to see. So first substantial contact. Again, the trick is trying to get to the consumer before we hit first substantial contact. If we can't get to them before, then basically, guys, it's in their best interest if we interrupt them. Remember that couple that came into my open house, the second couple, and they walked in the front door talking about their motive? Would I be doing them justice if I let them keep talking and sharing all their information with me, saying, well, great, technically speaking, I represent the seller, so everything you told me, I got to take it back to them. How does that make the consumer feel? They feel deceived. They feel like I tricked them. There may be times that you need to interrupt people. There may be times where you need to be prepared to say, please stop talking. And that's in their best interest, is that they understand what they're telling us. They understand that it could hurt. That's what it comes down to. They could hurt themselves, their negotiating powers. I don't know about you guys, but I was raised, the house I was raised in, I was raised that it was rude to interrupt people. Anybody else? Mama said, don't interrupt, right? In this case, Mama's wrong. Y'all don't tell my mama I said that, but in this case, Mama's wrong. In this case, it's rude to let them keep talking. Remember what we said the other night, you guys. You've always got to know where your loyalty is. You've always got to know who you represent. And you have a duty to tell consumers that. And that's what we're doing in this with this working with real estate agent disclosure. So if this first substantial contact happens in person, we're doing an open house. I have these things in my trunk. You can pull it up on your phone. We can get it. So if it happens in person, face to face, then we're going to provide and discuss either before first substantial contact or interrupting when we feel that first substantial contact is happening. Like we said, it could also happen on the phone. Maybe they send you an email. Maybe they do an inquiry on your website and just start typing. We still have a duty to discuss, even though we're on the phone or via email. But now, because we're not in person, not because I can't hand it to them, I need to make sure that I get it in their hands to sign no later than 3 days. So if it's not in person and I can't say, here you go, then we need to make sure we get their email address or whatever form of communication so we can get it to them within 3 days. But understand, even if it's by phone or electronic means, we still discuss immediately at first substantial contact. We can't get away with the, well, I didn't see them, so we didn't have to do it. Designated dual agency is always two agents. Dual can be one agent working. Dual could also be 2 agents working. Designated is always 2. Yeah, and I'm not sure connectivity. I've not seen. You guys can all see and hear me okay? Everything's okay? Okay. Again, you're getting ready for that listing appointment. You're getting ready for that buyer consultation. You know where the conversation's going. You know you're going to ask questions like, what do you want to sell? Or how much do you want to make when you sell your house? You know, when you're talking to the buyer, you're going to get into questions like, what do you want to buy? Do you have a timeline that you have to buy in? That's just the general flow of these meetings with buyers and sellers. That's kind of the easy part. We know it's going to happen. We know we're hitting that first substantial contact. So let's go ahead and do our working with real estate agent disclosure as soon as we get to the listing appointment or as soon as we sit down at the buyer consultation. So that way we have it done and we know that we've covered it. The what ifs. are all those other times. Maybe somebody comes into your open house, and like I said, you guys, just because they walk in the front door of your open house doesn't mean they've disclosed this first substantial contact thing. Maybe log out and log back in. That's my answer to everything, Jennifer. Log out, log back in. The whole point of this is to explain agency. I'm not forcing them to sign anything. Maybe we'll enter into an agency agreement. Maybe we won't. It's kind of like I'm Mirandaizing them. Anybody, we've seen enough TV shows and movies. None of us know this from firsthand experience, but we've seen enough TV shows to know when somebody gets read their Miranda rights, what are they telling you in part? Anything you say can be held against you. And that's what we're doing. We're warning them. And that buyer starts sharing all their reasons for buying at your open house. Again, somebody mentioned the party. I'm not saying you need to run around with these things at a party, but don't you need to be on alert? Because guys, here's the thing. People love to talk about real estate. And once they know you're in real estate and they bump into you at a party, I'm not going to say they're going to come up and say, hey, I want to buy a house tomorrow. Can you? But what they do is start talking about what's going on in the market, what's going on, this crazy seller's market, or, our house is selling. Is real estate busy? That's the question I get on the regular. Is real estate busy? Those aren't specific to transactions. Somebody comes up to you to party, they want to talk about the market. That's not specific. Now, in the next breath, if they say, gee, we really want to buy, do you think we could sit down and talk to you? Don't, call them out at the party, but schedule your time, tell them you'll call them tomorrow, and then make sure when you're, probably not with the drink in your hand, that you're having these conversations, you're doing this buyer consultation. I went to a Halloween party a couple of years ago, and the host came up to me and said, what can I sell my house for? I don't know. I haven't researched it. I haven't looked at, oh, come on, tell me. I won't hold you to it. Famous last words, right? No, guys, that's just not professional. So yes, be prepared for these things, but also know that we're going to have the official conversation, the next day. We talked about being in the grocery store, or anytime you're wearing your name tag. My old car, my husband called me a traveling billboard. My back windshield had my name, my real estate firm, my email address, my phone number, and the fact that I was a real estate professional. If I was in my car, was I running around in the capacity of a real estate agent? Could I hit first substantial contact in the McDonald's drive-thru? So you got to be on alert when you're putting yourself out there. Now, with that being said, we all need to take a break, right? We all get to take a break every once in a while. So some days I drove my husband's car just because, but you're with me, right? When you're running around acting as that capacity, we got to be prepared. And I will say there is a time and a place to discuss specifics about listing or helping you buy a home. And those specifics are not at a party. So get that conversation to the next day.
Yeah,
The other
Julie,
thing yeah.
I'm the one that said something about the party, and that's
Okay.
what I was kind of thinking. I didn't think it would be ethical of me to discuss those terms with somebody who has a drink in their hand. I wanted them to be in the right state of mind.
Exactly, Rochelle. And like I said, I mean, to his point, I got to look at some numbers. I got to look at your neighborhood. I got to look at the activity. I'm not just going to blurt a number out, especially when he says, oh, I won't hold you to it. Ha, ha, ha. No. So, whatever. We dropped the conversation and went on, but they weren't really wanting to sell. They were just, it was a crazy seller's market where, sellers were cashing in. So that's all. People see headlines, they watch the news, and then you walk in their front door to their party and they're like, ooh, we can talk to her. So again, if you're talking specifics about the transaction or the people, and that's what we need to make sure we're on the lookout for. The other thing I have to say we're going to run through a couple scenarios together, make sure we have an understanding of this first substantial contact. Let me say a few more things. First off, just because somebody talks to you, just because somebody comes up to you, approaches you in any way and says they want to buy a house, that doesn't mean anything. Guess what everybody's going to tell you? I want to buy a house. That's just what people say. We're looking for motivation. I need to buy within 3 months, or I must sell within 4 months, right? There's that difference in a general conversation versus that motivation. You guys remember on day one, let's go the whole way back to day one. And we said, there's the real world, and then there's pre-licensing world. Anybody remember that? We're all in pre-licensing world right now, right? This is a mandatory disclosure. What does mandatory mean? You got to do it. Is it optional? Can you choose to do it or not? No. I'm going to be very honest with you guys. There's a good portion of real estate agents in the state that don't do this right and or handle this properly. And I think one of the biggest disconnect you guys have, anybody ever bought or sold a house within the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, 10 years or so, something like that? A lot of you will come to me and say, when I bought my house 2 years ago, the agent didn't do the disclosure. When I went to an open house and started sharing my confidential information, the agent didn't do this. In this case, that blurry line between real world and pre-licensing world is gone. This is very much a real world application. And I'm telling you right now, remember those disciplinary actions we talked about on Tuesday? You see failure to do working with real estate agent disclosure on the regular. It's not a problem until it's a problem. And now it's a problem. So please don't, you guys, I need you not to get it in your head that your agent didn't do it for you, so it must be okay. No, you guys need to be doing this. This is why we're stressing it, the importance of it. And this is why we're having these conversations now. Again, you're going to form your elevator speech. I promise you, the first time you go over that disclosure, it's going to be bumpy and awkward, and you're going to sound like you don't know what you're talking about. But if you get that elevator speech down, that thing will be second nature. And always remember it. You're doing it to protect the consumer. You're doing it to protect the consumer. Maybe they'll become your client. Maybe they'll become your customer. Maybe you'll never see them again. They're the consumer. We've got to do this early in the relationship. There was a commissioner, an actual commissioner. He and his wife, several years ago, were interested in buying a house. So they decided they were going to go open housing one Sunday. They were down at the coast somewhere, and they decided to go open housing one Sunday. A commissioner. And he was having a conversation with the listing agent, the agent holding the open house. And the commissioner felt like they had hit for substantial contact. And the commissioner said, "Is there anything you need to review with me?" And the agent went, "Nope." And he said, "Nothing you need to disclose?" She went, "Uh-uh." He was like, "Nothing you need to give me?" She went, "Nope, we're good." He tried 3 times. And then he identified himself. What do you think she said? Maybe she uttered some 4-letter words, a whole strew of them, you know. Seriously, you guys, you may meet people, do your working with real estate agent disclosure, and you may never see them again. We got to keep, how long do we keep everything? How long do we retain records? We keep everything, for 3 years. And that includes all of our signed working with real estate agent disclosures, whether or not they become a client or not. I have a folder in my cloud that's called WWREA 2024. So every one of these things I get signed this year is going to go in there, because I'm telling you guys, if it goes down, I always think of the commission as kind of like the IRS. Once you give them a reason to investigate, they may say, "Hey, while we're here, let's see all of your working with real estate agent disclosures for the past 3 years. And if all you have are the ones that were transactions, became transactions, little red flags are going up." This is a consumer form. I had a listing several years ago. I got a call off the sign. The lady asked me if we could meet that afternoon so I could show it to her. I said, of course. I did it. We were still in the driveway. I did it on the trunk of my car because I needed her to know who I represented in that transaction. She hadn't even started talking, but before we went around that house and she started oohing and on about everything she liked about it, isn't that only fair that I let her know that I represent the seller? And you need to be careful what you tell me if you choose to move forward in this transaction. So I went through my little spiel and I handed her the pen, and she said, and I quote, "I just met you. I'm not signing anything you give me." Fair enough. Fair enough. Consumers, it's a trust issue. So let me ask you guys, if she refused to sign that disclosure, do you think I just said, well, then I can't show you this house. Sorry, lady. Is that what's in the best interest of my seller? No. If they refuse to sign, and guys, they will. Sometimes they will refuse to sign. All we can do is write refuse to sign, and I would put as much information on there as you could. I put the woman's name, I put the date, I put the address, you know. Again, if all of your working with real estate agents disclosures say refuse to sign, the commission's going to have a flag go up. I think most people, if we're doing a good job explaining it, and that comes back down to your elevator speech. Let's see, if you do have someone come in an open house and they disclose too much and they really want the house, would it still be unethical to refer them to another agent, even though you know so much? My duty in that situation is to whom? It's to the seller. Where I got unethical was letting that buyer keep talking. Where I got unethical is when I didn't say, please, sir, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but you need to understand, in this home, I represent the seller. And whatever you tell me, you might as well be talking to the seller directly, because I have a duty to share that with them, especially if you want to make an offer. So where do we get unethical? I could represent the buyer, right? If my firm allows dual agency, I could do both. We're not there yet. I'm not creating agency yet. I'm disclosing to this person that came into my open house where my loyalty, where my old car is right now. Now, do you want to talk about hiring me? You want to talk about buying this house? That's a different conversation after we disclose that agency status.
Julie, do you not get a signature from her? Like if they refuse to sign and you write that, do you not need a signature um with them stating that they refuse to sign?
I I can't make anybody do anything. So I
Okay.
can't, you know, put the pen in her hand and force her hand to it, right? All I can do is offer it to her. And that's exactly what she said. I just met you. I'm not signing anything. She wasn't there for me. She was there to see the house, but I wanted to warn her before we went in the front door. Now, as it turns out, she wasn't interested. I don't know why, because I terrified her and she didn't say anything when we got inside, which is fine because who do I represent? I represented the seller. That was my listing. But you know, because she refused to sign, and guys, you may have somebody that wants to work with you. You may have a buyer that works with you that refuses to sign. Refusing to sign is not negating my ability to explain and become your agent. So if they refuse to sign, we just make note of it and then we keep going because we still have a job to do. But again, Rachel, if every single one of those say refuse to sign, the commission's going to say you're not very good at this or you're not doing it right. You know what I'm saying? They're going to have a flag go up.
Yeah, that's what I was worried about. I mean, she could easily say, I didn't know, so I
And
didn't
that's
know if
why I
that
had my
signature would be better.
documentation. That's why I had my
Yeah.
documentation, you know, like I said, I put down refuse to sign, her name, the date, the time. Would have gotten me out of a court of law. I don't know, but at least it allowed me to go in there with a leg. You know, at least I had something as opposed to nothing at all saying, well, she didn't sign anything. You know, at least I had that, my version of the documentation. Other questions on our working with real estate agent disclosure? Again, there's the form itself, and we might be starting to get a few pages off if you're an old book person, but it's here in Unit 7. I'm on 167, 168. And then what we're looking at, there's the Q&A brochure. I said it was like a nice pull out. You got the actual brochure. To me, that's hard to read unless you have your magnifying glass with you. So you may want to look at the Unit 7 material in the online learning system. Ashley, do you have a question?
Is that mandatory to give the question and answer brochure if the consumer didn't ask?
No, the Q&A brochure is not mandatory. Good question, but the disclosure is. The brochure helps, and it helps a lot, you guys. That's the voice of experience speaking. The brochure helps because now we're not only having these conversations, but now I'm putting something in their hand, something tangible in their hand that backs up what I've been saying. But yeah, only the disclosure is mandatory. So let's run through just a couple scenarios. This idea of first substantial contact, again, just because you meet somebody, don't chase them away with your working with real estate agent disclosure. But we need to be on alert, especially when you have yourself in the position, in the capacity of acting as an agent. So Crystal saw a property listed by XYZ Realty that she's interested in purchasing. She calls the firm and inquires about whether the property is still available. The agent on duty indicates the property is still available, it's active, and it's listed at $675,000. Crystal asked a question, is it available? Agent said yes. What's it for? We can get this $675,000 from any website that advertises this listing for sale. Is this a big secret, what we're listing it for? No, she probably knew that when she called, didn't she? Because she called from a website. She called from the listing. So shake your head yes or no. Did we hit first substantial contact? No, we're still talking about the property. We're still talking about the details of the property. Is it available? What's it listed for? I think a really good rule of thumb, if you can find it online, it's public knowledge. So the list price, all that information is available. Do I need to be on alert? Do I need to be on alert for Crystal to start talking about herself? Yes, because she's inquiring about a property. She's inquiring about something I have listed. But at this point, there's no reason to bombard her because she's just asking specifically about the property. So no, we haven't hit it yet. We might, but we haven't hit it yet. Wanda goes to an open house. She's not represented by an agent. She enters the house and is immediately impressed by a floor plan. She asks the listing agent if the house is available for a quick move-in because she needs to purchase within 45 days to start a new job and will send an offer by the end of the day. What do we think? Oh, Wanda, didn't she share too much? Didn't she? I mean, as soon as she quick move-in, purchase within 45 days, offer by the end of the day, don't I have a duty when this offer comes in to share this information with my seller? I tell my client everything about the customer. I tell the customer nothing about the client. Did we hit first substantial contact? Yes. Does this mean I needed to bombard Wanda when she comes into my open house? No. But as soon as she starts asking questions, is this available for a quick sale? What does that tell me? That tells me this buyer needs to buy. Does that affect their negotiating power? Absolutely. So did we hit it? Yes, because we learned about Wanda's motivation. We should have tried to do our first substantial contact before that hit. Let's talk about Paul. Agent Paul hears a ting on his laptop notifying him he has a new message from his website. The message is from a potential buyer that wants to learn more about the home buying process. The message then goes on to say the need to buy within the next 2 months, and specifically, I'm interested in a condo or a townhome. What do we think? Have we hit it? We have. We learn their terms. We know when they need to buy. We know what they want to buy. You got to pay attention to those emails. And guys, there's nothing I can do about that, right? The only thing I can do is respond and say, whoa, 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 try to get that buyer consultation. Same thing on the phone. Same thing just with people. Like I said, people talk. It blows my mind what people say. So we just need to make sure that we're on alert. Remember, it's in the consumer's best interest, not mine. It's not about me. It's in the consumer's best interest that they know where I stand in this transaction. Once we do our working with real estate agent disclosure, let's go back to our open house. That couple that came into my open house that told me their terms and when they had to buy and why and everything. So let's say I cut them off. Well, guys, I appreciate what you're telling me, but I need you to understand, and this is who I represent, and talking to me is just like talking directly to the seller. I do my working with real estate agent disclosure with that couple. I get them to sign and everything. I go over it with them. I review it with them. Again, handing it to them is not enough. And I get them to sign, and then they say, So anyway, as we were saying, this is our price point, and we're really looking for specifically for this. At that point, y'all, I have done my job by disclosing it once. At that point, I might as well get out my pen and paper and start taking notes for the seller. Once we disclose, once we let them know where we stand, we've done our job. If they want to keep talking, if you've done your job right, and they want to keep talking. Somebody says, are we looking for specifics in conversations? PTM, price, term, and motive. Again, you can talk about the property all day long. We could all go out on break and find a different website, look up the same property on a different website, and find out information about the property. What we need to look for is when the people start sharing that PTM, price, term, and motive. That is first, hear me, substantial contact. It's substantial about this transaction, this conversation, this moment in time. Again, you come in and talk about the weather and baseball and whatever else. What did I learn about you in this transaction? Nothing. You talk to people all day long. It's about this conversation, this transaction right here, right now. We've covered this. You guys already know this, but here's the official slide. It's Commission Rule 58A.0108. Again, you don't need to know the rule. I just put it here to make it look official and important. We have a duty to keep everything, including our signed disclosures, for 3 years, whether or not they become a client or a customer, or you never see them again, or they refuse to sign. We got to keep everything for 3 years. Let's see, would first substantial contact still be hit if there's a couple talking about it to each other, not directed towards us, and I overhear it? Yes, because what I hear, what I would hear would be what my seller would hear, right? If my seller were standing there, they would hear that, and that's what we are. We are acting on behalf of our sellers. So even if they're in the other room going, oh my gosh, we love this house and I know what they're asking, but maybe we should come in a little bit more. I need to run in that room and say, what are you guys doing? You know, go outside and talk about that. Price, term, and motive. It's exactly right. It affects their negotiating power. Because now that couple that was talking in the other room brings an offer this afternoon. Don't I have to share that with my seller? By the by, this is what they said. They know they weren't talking directly to me. Once we do our disclosure, Commission Rules says at that time, we need to determine in what capacity we're going to work. Are we going to enter into a listing agreement? Are we going to enter into a buyer agency agreement? Am I going to proceed as a seller sub-agent? Are you a for sale by owner? Is dual agent a possibility? Once we do our disclosure, we got to determine how we're going to continue. I need to know now where you go on my plane. I need to know right now if I'm going to give you old car or if I'm going to leave you back in coach with honesty and fairness and disclosure material facts. We're going to learn more about our agency agreements. We're getting there in Unit 8. But it's kind of the do this, then that. Before I can create agency, I must disclose my agency status. And that's what this is. Again, maybe it's a buyer consultation. You're not coming in an open house. You got my information from a coworker. I helped your coworker buy a house. So now you're coming to meet me to see about buying a house. I'm hoping to be your buyer's agent. Don't I have a duty to disclose what that means? Don't I have a duty to discuss what that means if you allow me to become your buyer's agent? It's our agency status right here, right now. for the most part, we disclose our status at first substantial contact. And here's a couple commission, well, actually, it's all Commission Rule A, 58A.0104, which is the one I asked you guys to read, the only commission rule I asked you guys to read. When you're talking to a prospective buyer or seller, we have this duty to disclose who we are at first substantial contact. If you have already been hired as a seller's agent, or you are acting as a sub-agent and you're communicating with the buyer for the first time, we have a duty to disclose. This is our open house example at first substantial contact. Now, I'm not giving the working with real estate agent disclosure to another agent, but I still have a duty to say, I'm the listing agent. I work with the seller. I still have a duty to disclose my status. This third one's a little bit different. If you've already been hired as a buyer's agent and you are speaking on behalf of your buyer to the seller or the seller agent, I have a duty to disclose my status of being a buyer's agent at initial contact. The difference in initial and first substantial is once we get into something substantial about this transaction. Initial is, hi, my name is Julie Campbell, and I'm working with a buyer that's interested in your listing. This is going to go down typically one of two ways. Your buyer's agent, you've already been hired. Buyer calls you and says, there's a listing I want to go see tomorrow afternoon. You say, great. You go into our centralized showing system, centralized showing program. You schedule a showing and you check a box. What is your role? How are you showing this property? Are you showing it as a buyer's agent? Are you showing it as a seller sub-agent? Are you showing it as a dual agent? So you check a box. The seller and the listing agent get an email. Julie Campbell, buyer's agent, wants to show your property tomorrow at 2 o'clock. When did they learn about the fact that I'm a buyer's agent? At initial contact. Same scenario. Buyers want to go see listing property tomorrow, but now they got a couple questions for the listing agent or the seller. Maybe they want to know if they ever smoked in the house because they have severe allergies to cigarette smoke. Do you have a material fact on your hand? Do you have a duty to call that listing agent, ask? Sure. So now you call the listing agent. You say, hi, I'm Julie Campbell, and I'm working with a buyer that's interested in your property. We're thinking about coming to see it tomorrow, but I got a quick question first. When did you disclose your status of being a buyer's agent? At initial. I got my name out and then I stated my status. The only reason I didn't do it because it's weird to say buyer's agent, Julie, they call me Julie Campbell, right? So I think it's okay to say your name first. Agent to agent, no, I'm not doing the disclosure. I'm not doing disclosure agent to agent, but I do have it's a duty to disclose. I'm not going to hand you another agent, the working with real estate agent disclosure, but I do have a duty to disclose to that agent what my role is. So it's not even agent to agent. I've been hired as a buyer's agent and I'm talking to a seller or seller's agent the first time. Does everybody see that? You are already acting in this capacity. You are reaching out on behalf of your buyer seller. There is a place, if we look, page 168. Actually, 167. So if you're a buyer's agent, you're talking to the for sale by owner. Yeah. There's a buyer agent working with a non-represented seller. So I got a little box there for me to check if that's that capacity. It doesn't matter who the seller is the seller represented or not? It doesn't matter if the buyer's represented or not. They are consumers and they deserve to know my agency status. The FISBO doesn't have an agent. They went it alone. They're standing over there all by themselves. The other thing in the brochure, and again, you can see it in your book, but it's kind of hard to see. So I kind of blew it up here. They just totally revamped the disclosure in the brochure. I think 2020, 2021, something like that. And they gave us pictures. Y'all know by now how I feel about pictures, right? So I was just thrilled when the commission gave us pictures. But the pictures kind of help us see and explain to the consumer what these different agency statuses look like. So buyer agency and seller agency, you got broker A with the red firm, you got broker B with the blue firm. Two different firms, one's holding the buyer's hand, one's holding the seller's hand. In dual agency, both brokers are with the red firm. Everybody see that? One firm in dual agency. Dual agency can be two agents. Dual agency can be one agent working with both the buyer and the seller. Check this out though. In dual agency with two agents, they are standing here hand in hand because dual agency is about the firm. Designated dual agency, we still got two brokers with the red firm, but now they're not holding hands anymore. That exclusivity comes back. Questions? With this working with real estate agent, this all sales transaction, there's one, it's not really an exception, but it's kind of a special circumstance. When we're dealing and talking about auction sales are a totally different category, different bucket. They're not the traditional sales. Please hear me. I don't want you guys to even think about auction sales unless the question specifically says something about an auction sale. We mention it here, we bring up another slide in like unit 9, and that's all we say about auctions. In an auction sale, the auctioneer is hired by the seller. They also have a real estate license. They have two licenses, auctioneer license and real estate license. And with the auction sales, the seller's agent, the auctioneer, is not required to do the working with real estate agent disclosure with the buyer in an auction sale. Maybe the buyer in this auction sale is represented, maybe they're not. But either way, the seller's agent, I should say, also known as the auctioneer, is not required to do the disclosure. Now, the auctioneer is required to do the disclosure when they meet the seller for the first time. If the buyer is represented, then the buyer's agent's going to do the disclosure when they meet. This is saying the auctioneer to the buyer. And that's kind of the special circumstance. So again, y'all don't even pretend like auction sales exist unless the question says something about an auction. Did everybody hear me? Can I get some thumbs ups, please? Okay. Auction sales are just, like I said, they're just handled a little bit differently because the seller has a different representation. And it's presumed that when the buyer goes to the auction, they know that the auctioneer represents the seller. They know that that's what they are doing, is selling the property for the seller or helping the seller sell. You guys here? We're back. Okay. I just saw everybody speed up, catch up. Another thing, again, we've kind of danced all around it, but now we're here. We're going to talk about something called oral buyer agency. Now, before I do that, I want to just refresh a couple terms that we've seen already. We'll see them a few more times. Here's our express and implied again. Remember the difference. If something is express, it means that the terms have been clearly stated. Maybe those terms have been stated orally. Maybe those terms have been stated in writing. Doesn't matter. The fact is that they have been clearly stated. Implied then is just based on actions. You just start acting like somebody's agent. You just start acting under those agency duties. The Real Estate Commission will allow us to work with buyers and tenants at first under an oral agreement. I can never work with an owner of a property, may that be for sale or for rent, with an oral agreement. Oral is only allowed with buyers and tenants. And focusing specifically on oral buyer agency, I want you guys to do something for me. Hold up your left hand. Hold up the two fingers on your left hand. Close your right eye. Take those two fingers and on your screen, cover up the word oral. Y'all look fantastic, by the way. If you cover up the word oral, what am I dealing with? Buyer agency. And in buyer agency, what do I owe the buyer?
Honesty, fairness, and material facts.
Nope. In buyer agency, what do I owe the buyer?
Old
Oh,
car?
old car.
Wouldn't you give them old car?
Oral
car.
buyer agency is agency. I owe this buyer in an oral buyer agency agreement, old car. How do we get away with this? Because it's express. You can't just start acting like somebody's agent. You have the opportunity, we have the opportunity to explain the terms of agency, tell a buyer what it means for me to be your agent, dual agency and working with real estate agent disclosure and all that stuff we've already talked about. But we have the opportunity to work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first. And under that agreement, I owe them old car. Here's the deal. Buyers take time to build trust, to build that repertoire. I always think of them as like these skittish little woodland creatures, you know, that like run away easy. We want to ease in. We want to let them know that they can trust us. And because that takes time, the Real Estate Commission will allow us to work as an oral buyer agent. I'm giving you old car. We just haven't put anything in writing yet. I still have to explain what that means. It's express. So a couple things to understand about oral buyer agency. It must be express, meaning you just can't start acting like somebody's agent without having the conversation, sitting down and explaining to them what agency means. And I cannot work on an oral buyer agency agreement forever. The latest we have to work on an oral buyer agency agreement is when I'm ready to present the offer on behalf of this buyer. I cannot present an offer on behalf of a buyer under an oral agreement. So we must put our oral buyer agency agreement in writing no later than the time that I'm ready to present the offer on their behalf. When I'm presenting the offer on their behalf, that means I have the paperwork filled out, signed by the buyer, and I am communicating that offer with either the listing agent or the seller. That is presenting an offer. Oral buyer agency can never be exclusive. I cannot demand exclusivity. Let's talk about this word exclusive for a second. Let me ask you guys something. If you are dating somebody exclusively, how many people should you be dating? Should you be dating? Women tend to answer that one faster than men. What's up with that? If you're dating somebody exclusively, you should be dating one person. So if we're demanding exclusivity, we're saying the buyer can only date one firm. And I cannot demand that. I cannot demand exclusivity on an oral agreement. So oral buyer agency is non-exclusive, which means the buyer could be working with a couple different firms. They're not tied down. Understand too, exclusivity is just a one-way street. The buyer's only dating one firm. The firm is dating multiple buyers. The firm is dating multiple sellers. So it cannot you cannot demand exclusivity. If you do, you got to get it in writing. I also cannot have an oral buyer agency agreement for a specific period of time. I can't say you and I are going to work together for 2 months. If I'm going to put a time limit on our relationship, I have to get it in writing. Some firms may tell you we don't do oral buyer agency. You may choose in your practice to not do oral buyer agency. Remember what we're doing. We're teaching you the parameters. I promise you, you are not going to have a test question that says, are you going to do oral buyer agency? The test question is going to say, can you do oral buyer agency? What you're going to do on your own time, once you get your license, great. Right now, we're talking about those parameters. So an oral buyer agency, the buyer is not the customer. The buyer is the client. An oral buyer, and again, cover up that word oral. What kind of relationship are we in? What kind of agency are we in? Buyer agency. Now, Brooke, to your point, I owe them old car. An oral buyer agency, what do you think they owe me? See head shaking now? You're right. You're right. They don't owe me anything, including insurance of commission, which is the big reason why we want you to put this thing in writing before you present the offer on their behalf, so we can make sure you get paid. I owe them old car. They owe me nothing. Got a few scenarios to run after break, but questions so far? We have created buyer agency. We just did so orally. And again, how do we get away with this? Because it's express. The terms have been clearly stated. Now, let me ask you guys, you have this conversation with this buyer and you say, you know, you and I, we're going to work together and I'll be your agent. This is what I owe you and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You think you want to go home and follow up with an email? You think you want to go home and document that conversation? Y'all about to nod your heads off your shoulders, right? Because what do we document? Everything. So if you're having this conversation, this oral buyer agency conversation face to face, please go home and follow it up with an email. Please go home and say, you know, this is what it means. And as a matter of fact, hang on, before we go to break, I actually have a sample letter for you guys in the online learning system where it talks to this buyer about what it means to be an agency agreement. It says, you know, here are the terms. And I'm not going to ask you to sign anything until you find the one and I'm ready to present the offer. Again, this is in the Unit 7 material, and I'll let you guys look at it. But if we go the whole way down to the bottom, am I asking the buyer to sign anything? I'm not asking them to commit. I'm just putting us in an express agreement. The terms have been clearly stated. You guys need to take it a step further and document that conversation. And that's what this letter, this sample letter, can help you do, just as for an example. Questions? Let's take 10. Like I said, when we come back, we're going to run a few The what ifs. I hear you. What if? All right, cameras are back on. I'm going to take attendance and let's talk more about this oral buyer agency thing. So again, it is buyer agency. I am in an agency relationship. We just haven't put it in writing yet. The only way we can get away with it is because it's express. If you just start acting like you're somebody's agent, that's implied agency, and implied agency is never allowed. In order for us to act like an agent, we have to explain to the consumer what that means. We can work with them for however long we want under this oral buyer agency agreement. We can get it, we can demand to get it in writing the first day you meet me. I could say, well, let's do this for a couple weeks and see how we do, right? We can work together for however long we want. The latest we have to put this agreement in writing is when I'm ready to present an offer on their behalf. I cannot present an offer on a buyer's behalf without having this agency agreement in writing. It protects both of you, but as we mentioned earlier, if you don't have agency in writing, how much compensation do they owe you? Yeah, big zero. That doesn't pay the bills, y'all. So it protects us mostly, but we're still giving them old car up until this point and after we put it in writing. It cannot be exclusive, which means I cannot look at that buyer and say, I'm the only agent you're talking to. If I want to demand exclusivity, if I want to demand that they only date me, then we have to put it in writing. Or if I say we're going to work together for a certain period of time, may that be a day or a year, whatever. If I'm going to specify the time period, then we've got to get that in writing. So let's say you've met this buyer first, and again, your firm has to allow it. Not all firms practice oral buyer agency. Not all agents practice oral buyer agency. We're just teaching you the parameters. So let's say you've been working with this buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement for, I don't know, a couple weeks, taking them out, showing them property. You take them out this weekend and they find the one and they say, this is it. We want to write it up. So you go home, you write up the offer, you fill in the blanks for them, you get them to sign the offer. But before you present it, you have to get that thing in writing. Yes, you have to get buyer agency in writing. So you got the offer drawn up, signed, ready to present them. But the buyer says, yeah, no, I'm not signing that. We've been together this long and everything's been fine. Why do you need me to sign something now? Well, we got a couple options. When we look at our buyer agency agreement next week in Unit 8, we're going to see that I have the ability to put in a general location. So I have the ability in the buyer agency agreement to just create agency for this one property. I'll present your offer on 123 Main Street. If it gets accepted, I'm your agent. If it doesn't, we go back to oral buyer agency. We're not out anything. This is a hesitant buyer, and buyers are hesitant. So we can offer, we can put the agency agreement in for just one property. We could do an agency agreement just for a day. And if your offer gets accepted, then we can extend it. So we can kind of work around this. We may want to offer to switch the buyer. Actually, that should say downgrade the buyer. If you won't sign this, I can downgrade you from first class to coach. Is the buyer going to like that? Probably not. Here's the deal, you guys. First off, I need the listing firm and the seller's permission. Remember, not everybody allows seller sub-agency. So I need to know that they're on board, they allow that. But we also need to explain in writing or follow up with an email that if I downgrade this buyer, you're no longer my client, you're now my customer. And now that you're my customer and I'm hanging out over here on the side with the seller as a seller sub-agent, with all that confidential information I knew about that buyer, I now have a duty to share that with the seller. Downgrading is not the preferred method. Switching is not the preferred method. Can we all understand why? I mean, you're looking at that buyer and you're saying, I know your price point, I know your motivation, I know your terms. And as soon as we make that switch, I now owe it to the seller to share that with them. The other reason why downgrading is not preferred, why switching, I should say, is not preferred, the commission doesn't want us to get in the habit of acting like a buyer's agent without having the conversation of a buyer's agent, and then come to find out we're just seller sub-agents. That's not how you protect the consumer. We enter into these with express agreements. Oral buyer agency is an express agreement. But bottom line, you guys, if they still refuse to sign and they don't like the idea of downgrading, I'm out. I have no other legal alternative. You're either my client or my customer. And if you say no to both, I'm out. The other thing that comes up in oral buyer agency is the consent or the non-consent for dual agency. If you're in oral buyer agency, we can get consent or non-consent to do dual. They can change their mind orally. Remember what we said, basic contract law. If it's in writing, the only way to change it is in writing. If we're still in an oral buyer agency agreement, they say no to dual, and then they later discover they want to see something listed by your firm, I can get them to change their mind orally, but when we put that in writing, we'll have to have consent to do dual. Questions on oral buyer agencies? Like I said, you guys, I know a lot of you right now are going, why would I work with a buyer if they're not guaranteeing me commission, if they're not signing anything, if they're not? I hear you. I hear you. Your test is not going to ask you what you're going to do. Your test is going to ask you what you can do. Can you work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first? Yes. We've got to put our feelings and emotions aside. It's risky. I'm not going to lie. It's risky. I know there have been cases of buyers out there that call 3 or 4 agents and say, this is what I'm looking for. The first one wins. Go. The one that's going to get paid is the one that finds a property and put them under contract. Do you want to engage in that? Oh, I don't know. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But in oral, it's not exclusive. They can talk to as many agents, as many firms as they want to. What questions do I have?
I have a question. Is this something that if we decided we didn't want to participate with, it was something some time ago you told us that we had a choice on whether we
Well,
wanted to.
I mean, yeah, and it would come down because the agency is about the firm. So your firm may tell you if you can or cannot do it.
Okay.
I think what we were talking about, Tink, is the single agent, dual agent.
Okay.
But in this case, your firm will either allow you to do it or they won't. You know what I'm saying? So your firm's going to set that policy. Like I said, I know firms that they don't let any of their buyers agents work under an oral agreement. So if we're working together, we have something in writing. I know agents within firms that choose not to work under an oral. But think about it. You sign a buyer's agency agreement with me for 2 months, 6 months, whatever. Is there still any kind of guarantee you're going to find your dream home, buy it, go under contract, close during that time? It's all a bit risky, isn't it? There's no guarantee on these transactions, whether you got something in writing or not. at least in a written agency agreement, we know it's exclusive. We know they shouldn't be dating other firms. The last piece of Unit 7 is just the nature of the brokerage business. We talked about the broker in charge. You guys are soon to be provisional brokers. Once you get licensed, you go take your state exam, you pass both sections, and you are issued a real estate license. They hand you a license on inactive status. Now, I know we haven't talked about active or inactive, but just what do you think on inactive status? What do you think you can do? Nothing. Congratulations. Here's your brand new license. You can't do anything with it. Good job. As a provisional broker, in order to activate your license, you must affiliate with a broker in charge. You have to have your training wheels. You cannot ride your bike without your training wheels. The broker in charge is your training wheels. So you are inactive as a PB if you are not affiliated with a firm. As a PB, when you affiliate with a firm, the BIC takes on the responsibility of coaching you, training you, getting you off to the right start. As a provisional broker, if you get yourself in trouble with the real estate commission, you will take your BIC down with you. Period. End of story. Because the commission's going to say, you wouldn't have done this if your BIC was in your back pocket, if your BIC was acting like the training was. There are other things that the BIC is responsible for all brokers of the firm, both provisional brokers and non-provisional brokers. As a full broker or a non-provisional broker, if you get yourself in trouble with the commission, you may or may not take your BIC down with you. It just depends. As a PB, you will. You guys, I always encourage you guys, and maybe you thought this far, maybe you haven't, but I always encourage you guys, when you're ready, I encourage you guys to talk to a couple different firms, talk to a couple different BICs, because you need something to compare and contrast. Please hear me. All firms are different. The commission sets the parameters and says, this is how you can operate. So they're all different. They're not all set up the same. They're not all the same. So by you shopping around, by you talking to a couple different firms, you can, one, make sure that you have a connection with that BIC that's going to be in your back pocket. You also can make sure that you're not being hired by the firm, you're affiliating with the firm. And what you want to do when you talk to that BIC is make sure you guys are a good fit for each other. I know you guys care about commission, and I do too. How much am I going to get paid? What's your split? All that kind of good stuff. If I were you guys, before I started asking a lot of questions about commission, I would be asking the BIC about training. What kind of training programs do you offer new agents? Do you have a mentorship program? Guys, I'm telling you, if you get the training right out the gate, the money will follow. It takes time. It takes time. You want to ask about training, and not just about training programs for PPs, but what's your training for full brokers? What's your training when we drop that provisional status? Real estate is an ongoing learning experience. Laws and rules change, forms change, market changes, and real estate is ongoing. So asking these BICs and these interviews, what kind of training programs you offer, of course, ask them about compensation. What else is important to you? Do you care about charity? What do you guys do at Christmas time to raise money? Who's your charity? What do you do for fun? We like to have fun too. We always do a March Madness party. We're starting to talk about that, and that's like in March, but I'm already like super excited because, it's a lot of fun. So have fun, but guys, it's not an interview. They're not hiring you. You're affiliating with them. No, Jessica, you're good. Yep, you're good. So when we say you're an independent contractor, if you're an independent contractor as a sales associate, an independent contractor, who do you actually work for? Yourself. So if you come home tonight complaining about your boss, you're looking in the mirror, aren't you? There's a difference in being employed by and affiliated with. Employed by means you're an employee. You get a W-2. W-2 versus a 1099. W-2, they take taxes out at each pay. 1099, they don't take taxes until the end of the year. If it's your first, is anybody already an independent contractor? And your other couple of you? Yep, good. If it's your first year in being an independent contractor, or if it's your first year in sales, I highly recommend you meet with an accountant, because they can help you determine things that as an independent contractor, you can take as a tax write-off. They may recommend you set aside X amount from, 20%, whatever, I just made a number up, that you set aside X amount from each commission check. Because at the end of the year, you have not been paying taxes throughout the year. But guess what? At the end of the year, Uncle Sam is standing there with his hand out going, sweet, we had a good year, pay up. So I highly recommend your first year in sales, you talk to an accountant, make sure you're getting off the started on your taxes right. An employee works salary, they're paid salary or hourly. An independent contractor is paid on commission basis. Employees get benefits, independent contractors do not. The employee can dictate the working conditions. The employer can dictate the working conditions of the employee. So they can say, I want you to punch in at 9, you take lunch at 12, and you leave at 5. That's an employee. Independent contractor, you come and go. As a PB, you may have to account to your BIC. They may want you to come into the office every once in a while, and so they can be with you. So PB, you're under a tighter scrutiny, but they still, at the end of the day, we're independent contractors. So you have the freedom to set your own hours, your own activities. Guys, as an independent contractor, your BIC's not going to call you every day and say, did you send your emails? Did you prospect? Did you do what you were supposed to do today? That's what's being an independent contractor. If you want a closing, if you want to make money, you got to prospect. You got to do the work. Does that make sense? They may call and check on you, say, how's it going? Is there anything I can do to help you? But bottom line, real estate sales, this is your own business. You guys are starting your own business. Kind of cool, isn't it? I'm not gonna lie. Days like today with this icky weather, it was nice. I think I walked outside once just to see what it looked like, but it was nice not to have to go out into the office, go out for lunch, and it wasn't bad. My car didn't move today. Independent contractor. Nobody expected to see me in the office on a day like today. They knew better. What questions do I have on the difference? Employee versus independent contractor. Again, talk to your accountant. That's a big thing I want you guys to hear me say. So many agents their first year forget about the tax thing, and then Uncle Sam shows up, and that hurts. So it's suggested that you set some money aside with each transaction, each commission check. You're going to want to put some aside for your marketing and advertising. You got to put some aside for, a mileage and wear and tear on your vehicle. And an accountant can help you determine how much those different ratios. Are there firms that require X amount of days in the office or X amount of hours each week needed to be spent in the office, or is a blanket statement that in the office or work from your house? So if they do require it, because also as an independent contractor, the firm's going to ask you to sign an independent contractor agreement. So if they do require you to be in the office or show up for a certain amount of times, then that would have to be in their independent contractor agreement. My firm, we all take turns holding the office open. We're open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and one of us is there. So we have a schedule, and once we're on, we're committed. That's part of our agreement with the firm, is that we're all going to agree to take office duty. So yes, you could have them required, but about that. By the way, make sure you read and understand that independent contractor agreement before you sign it, to know what you're signing up for. And a lot of this should come out in your meeting. I'm not going to call it an interview because it's not, but a lot of this should come out your meeting. But I do highly suggest you talk to a couple different firms so you have something to compare and contrast. Does that make sense? I know some of you here, where you're going to go. Maybe your cousin has a firm, or so you know where you're going to go. And I think that's great. What does it hurt to talk to somebody? What does it hurt? Guys, it's business. It's not personal. It's business. And you need to make the best business decision for you. Your cousin will be fine. You need to make the best decision for you. Are we hiring? Always. We're always looking for good agents. And everybody will tell you that. That's the other thing too. Be careful. Everybody's hiring. They're looking for agents to affiliate with. Like I said, we're trying to find out that we're a good fit for each other. Questions? I am with a firm there in Winston-Salem called Blue Door Group Real Estate. I see head bobs behind Jiffy Lube. Y'all know us? No way. Yep, that's us. That's us. Do some real estate agents let you shadow them? Yeah, and the firm may, like your BIC may connect you with an experienced agent, somebody that they trust, knows what they're doing. So they may let you shadow when they go, to closing or on a listing appointment or something like that. So again, that whatever their training program is, it's going to vary from firm to firm. But ultimately, as a provisional broker, your BIC is responsible for you. So if they're letting you shadow somebody, they ought to know who they're letting you shadow. It's such a small world, Brooke. Isn't that something? Was it a Sagamore? No? You don't have to tell me. Unless you want to tell me to private chat. Private chat, please. Let's see. Are both W-2 and 1099 common, and how do we know which firm does which? So if you're hired, maybe you go in as an admin. There's admins that do work. So maybe you're go in if you're hired, if you're an employee, you're a W-2. Typically speaking, sales associate, real estate works on commission basis. So we're the 1099. But there are some firms that have an admin that does sale. So you would be paid 2 different ways. So you would have both. That's kind of the tricky thing about this, because all firms are different. So that's why I want you guys to shop around. Start with the markets you want to work. Go to Google. Start with what real estate firms are in that market. You may want to talk to some big national brands. You may want to talk to some smaller firms, kind of get a true comparison there. And remember, at the end of the day, we're an independent contractor. I'm not marrying the firm. I'm just affiliating with them. Agents do come and go. Agents leave. It happens. So if you get in and you realize it's not a good fit, you can go elsewhere. But again, read that independent contractor agreement, because in there it's going to spell out what happens if you leave. I know it's funny to think about it when you're so excited about joining, but you got to stop and ask yourself, what happens if I leave? And that should be covered in the independent contractor agreement. Anything else? We're done. Goodness. Do we ever think we'd see this? Everybody give yourselves a little woohoo. We made it through unit 7. I said it was deep. I said it was dense. Did I lie? It is. It is deep. It is dense. And I need you guys to keep going back and reviewing it and watching it or looking at it over and over and over again. That's so funny. So I'm the admin. Yeah, I process that closing. I do. I'm not doing sales at this time. So I'm just the behind the scenes that nobody really knows about. I take care of my agents and I let my agents go take care of buyers and sellers. No, no, Graham, we're not done for the evening. We're done with unit 7. Don't go anywhere. Like, is it 9:30 already? No, not yet. Unit 7, you guys, those key terms, page 134. Know what the words mean. Step 1, can you recall what the word means? If not, make a flashcard of it. A lot of unit 7 is application. So they're going to ask you, what does the word mean? They're going to give you a scenario. They're going to put you in a situation. And based on what we know, how we solve. And let's see, was it last Thursday we started unit 7? I think so. I think it was last Thursday. So we've been in it better part of 3 classes now. The key point review, I do like this as like a checklist, a Cliff's Notes, if you will. Do not use it as a substitute for the whole unit. There's not enough information in there for the whole unit. But again, use it as I know what this is. I know what that is. And then the student quiz on 182. There's also some good quizzes in the online learning system. So other than listings and working with a BIC, what are the other benefits of working with a firm? Training, culture, camaraderie, activity breeds activity, you know? So maybe one day you want to start your own firm. Anybody want to start your own one day? Few of you? You're a couple years away from that. We will talk about starting your own business. But as far as what's the benefits working with a firm, that's why I want you guys talking to a couple different firms. What can you offer me? Do we learn how to become a BIC? No, you're still a few years away from that as well. I think we're going to dance on it a little bit, but more on that in post-license. One thing at a time, you guys. Before you start your own firm and become a BIC, you got to have a couple years experience. Before you get this couple years experience, you got to get your license. Before you get your license, you got to get out of this class. Don't put your cart in front of your horse. One thing at a time. All right. On we go. Unit 8, we're going to specifically get into our agency agreements. We're going to talk about working with sellers and buyers. So our roadmap, we're going to explain our agency contracts, our agency agreements. We're going to talk about something called the North Carolina Residential Property Disclosure Act. This is actually a seller act. They have a form that they have to provide. We're going to talk specifically about working with buyers and sellers. And then at the end of the unit 8, we're going to pick up our calculators again. But guess what? This is fun math. Because at the end of unit 8, we're going to figure out how y'all can calculate your commission. And we're also going to figure out how much your seller is going to get. Do you think it's common for the seller to look at you and say, when you sell my house, what am I going to make? Yeah, that's probably why they're selling, right? So we're going to talk about how we can calculate that in your commission. Before we get into this, again, just make sure we see these words. We've seen this before. We'll actually see this one more time. But just make sure we're good with the ings. The ing is the verb. So if you're selling, you're working with the buyer. If you're listing, you're working with the seller. We're gonna see the ings when we look at our agency agreements. That's what they call us in official contract documentation, selling and listing. The other reminder I have before we get started is Commission Rule 58A.0104, which is your agency agreement, and this is in the Julie folder in the online learning system. So on page 186, we start talking about our agency agreements, our agency contracts in general. And our written agency agreements have 4 musts. You need to know these musts. Nod, nod, wink, wink. The 4 musts required in all written agency agreements. They must be signed by all parties. The buyer or seller will sign them. The individual agent will sign on behalf of the firm. So the parties that sign, buyer or seller, and the individual agent on behalf of the firm. Because the individual agent is the one signing it, another must, it must include your license number. Once you get licensed, you'll get a 6-digit number. Go ahead and memorize that because you need it everywhere you go. All of our agency agreements must have a definite end date. We can't have an open-ended agency agreement, and that date is a specific date. We're not going to say 45 days from now. People don't know how to count days in a contract. So instead, we're going to put a specific date, whatever that is, 45 days from now. And then another must, we have our non-discrimination clause. We tell the consumers that we will not discriminate. The firm nor the agent will discriminate against the protected classes as defined by fair housing. So again, I got a whole unit dedicated to fair housing, and we will talk about those protected classes. So any of our written agency agreements must have these 4 things. Please always remember, agency agreements are employment contracts. I'm being hired to do a job. I'm being hired to do a specific job. If you enter into a listing agreement with me, you're hiring me to list and sell your house. If you enter into a buyer's agency agreement, you're hiring me to help you locate and purchase a property. Property management agreement, you're hiring me to manage your property. They're employment contracts. Benjamin, do you have a question?
Yes, I was gonna ask the question with the termination date. You have to be specific. Is it working days, weekends included? You have to do that.
No, you're going to put a date in. And,
Just gotta put
a date.
saying
Yep.
on the 7th or on the 8th of this month.
Yep. We're going to be in this age. And the contract says 11:59 p.m. on, and then
On
you
this-
put a date in. Yep.
Okay.
So they even give us a time. But yeah. And to your point, Benjamin, I mean, that's where I kind of joke that people don't know how to count days, because do business days count? Do Sundays count? So this way we just put a date in and we don't have to worry about what counts. So employment contracts, please understand, we're being hired to do a job. All of our employment contracts must discuss, how am I going to get paid once I've done the job that you hired me to do? Maybe you're the one paying me, maybe you're not. But it has to discuss, how am I going to get paid once I've done the job that you hired me to do? Agency agreements, here's another must be in writing from the beginning with property owners. There is no such thing as oral seller agency or oral landlord agency. The only oral relationship we can have at first is with buyers and tenants. So our agency agreement must be in writing. I cannot perform a single service for an owner unless I have the agreement in writing. That is for sale with sellers, for lease. with owners in a property management situation. So the question comes in, why use a listing agreement? Well, other than the fact that it is an employment contract and it assures that you'll get paid when you've done the job that you've been hired to do. But our listing agreements allows us to create inventory. Once we have a listing, that listing goes into our listing service system that we're going to meet in a few pages. Once we put it in the listing service system, we're like pulling our listings together. Can we agree with the statement that a salesman needs a product to sell? What kind of salesman are you if you don't have a product, right? And you may be an agent without any listings right now, but by all of us within our listing services pulling our listings together, it creates inventory. It gives everybody a product to sell. So listing agreements, again, employment contracts, it gives us inventory, it gives me product to sell. Soliciting business. There's many different methods that you could choose to do to solicit business. How are you going to let buyers and sellers, consumers, know that you're out there and that you can help them? We're not getting into all that in this class. Remember, I'm not here to teach you guys how to be real estate agents. I'm teaching you the parameters. So what we need to talk about are the things that we can't do to solicit business. The first thing that comes up, I cannot solicit somebody else's active client. That is a direct violation. NAR's National Association of Realtors. Once you join the National Association of Realtors and become a realtor, you have a code of ethics to follow. And part of their code of ethics says we're not going to solicit somebody else's active client. Let's say, let's say I'm going to pick on Rachel. I just looked up and saw somebody. So I'm going to pick on Rachel. Let's say Rachel has a listing for sale and it's in MLS and I see it. And I call Rachel's sellers and I say, I could do a much better job than Rachel. I would price it differently. I would have pictures in there. I would get this thing sold. Why don't you just fire Rachel and hire me? Does that sound like good anything? We can't do that. If we see an active listing in MLS, thank you. If we see an active listing in MLS, we need to honor that. How many of you have been open housing? You guys have been to open houses? When you walk in the door of an open house, are you ever asked, are you working with an agent? Do you know why you're asked that? Because I'm trying to determine if you're fair game or not. If I ask you if you're working with an agent and you tell me yes, that means hands off. I've got to honor that relationship. If you tell me no, maybe you can work with me. So we got to find out. And once we find out that they are affiliated, or I'm sorry, that they're in an active agency agreement, we have to honor that. If for whatever reason your firm doesn't require you to join the National Association of Realtors, most of us do, but your firm may have a policy otherwise. Don't worry though, if you're not a member, that's still something that we can do. Torturous interference is like wrongfully interfering with somebody's business. So whether or not you're a member of NAR, we cannot solicit somebody else's active client. Another thing that we need to be aware of when we're soliciting business, if you're going to go the route of cold calling, I need you to get your hands on the do not call registry. And if that person is on the do not call registry, I can't call them. So if you think you're going to go pick up the phone and start calling for business, you've got to get your hand on that registry first. This is regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. Now with this, there are a couple exceptions. If you're calling a former client, that former client's on the do not call, but because you had a previous relationship, I can call them for up to 18 months after our relationship ended, or until they tell me to stop calling. That's what that asterisk means. If they tell me to stop calling, I've got to honor their request. It's not like I can say, we're still within our 18 months. So if you have a former client that's on the do not call, I can call them for up to 18 months or until they tell me to stop calling. If you get a consumer's phone number on a soft inquiry, maybe they fill out the thing on your website, the contact me on your website. Maybe they come into your open house and fill out your open house registry and put their phone number. We can call them, even if they're on the do not call. We can call them for up to 3 months after they provide me with their number or until they tell me to stop calling. Whenever somebody says, please stop calling me, we've got to honor that request. If there is a for sale by owner that is on the do not call, I can only call that FSBO if I have an interested buyer. If they are on the do not call, I cannot call to solicit their listing. So you have a buyer that found a FSBO, you can contact them on behalf of your buyer. You're sitting there right now going, gee, Julie, what's the big deal? It's only a phone call. Well, we're looking at fines of up to $10,000 per violation. I don't know. I know the do not call registry is nationwide, but I'm not sure if it varies from state to state. I know the other question I get with this, well, you guys, oh my gosh, it's been a while since I've gotten those spam calls, but you kind of go in and out of phases with those. I do anyway. And I'll go for the longest time without hearing anything. And then I'll get, now that I'm talking about it, I'll get like 8 spam calls tomorrow. That's just the way it goes, right? How do they get away with it? I don't know. I can't answer that. What I know is what we need to know if we're going to call, if we're going to solicit consumers. We've got to follow. You can go on, you can order the registry. I can't tell you how much it costs, but you can order it. The point is you've got to get your hands on it before you pick up the phone and randomly start calling people. Questions on that? Your book also mentions CAN Spam Act, junk fax. The big picture of both of those, if you're going to send bulk email, mass email to solicit, you got to give them the unsubscribe option. You guys get junk email every day. And at the very bottom, there's that link, teeny tiny, as small as it can be. But there's the option to unsubscribe. So if you're going to solicit via email, that's just FYI. If you're going to solicit via email, you've got to give them that unsubscribe option. If they reply to your email and say, remove me from your list, we've got to honor that request. You may be working with an out-of-state, also known as a foreign broker, crossing state lines. Guys, please remember, your real estate license is only good for properties located within the state of North Carolina. How many of you have families and friends outside of the state of North Carolina, all over the world, right? You can help that family member in Pennsylvania by referring them to an agent there. You cannot drive to Pennsylvania to assist in that transaction. What if that friend from Pennsylvania wants to send business down to North Carolina? They can help by referring them to you. In order to get paid a referral fee for crossing state lines, you have to have an active license, and you cannot go into that state for business. You can go in for pleasure. Of course, you can go visit your family, but you can't go in to help with the transaction. The only real estate thing you can do is here on North Carolina soil. And same thing with agents coming from another state. So as you guys are thinking about You know, where do I get my business? How do I let people know? I mean, I'll tell you, all the real estate coaches, everybody out there tells you your number one source is your center of influence. Ask yourself, who do I know? Because if you know a whole bunch of people, guess what? They know a whole bunch of people. So when you start thinking about your center of influence, don't discount your out of state family and friends. Back in my new agent training days, I gave them homework too. And you guys take this for what it's worth. But one of their homework assignments with me was to take a piece of paper and write 1 through 100 and then list 100 people you know. First 40, 50, 60, 70, it's pretty easy. After a while, you start stretching. Well, I know my dentist. Well, I know my mail carrier. Don't dentists and mail carriers got to live somewhere too? Don't discount because you don't know who they know. If you know 100 people, they probably know 100 people. Everybody with me? There's your free tip for the day. If the person is on the do not call, can you send them an email? Yes. If they're on the do not call, all they're saying is, I don't want to be called or texted. But yep, you can send them an email until they unsubscribe or they ask to be taken off your email list. Questions?
I have a question about this.
Yeah.
So, what about, let's say, for example, I want to become an agent and sell both, let's say, here in North Carolina and South Carolina. Is that possible?
It is. Once you get licensed here, you need to contact the South Carolina Real Estate Commission. So if you want to go into another state, you've got to contact that state's real estate commission. They're all different on what is required and what you need. And I'm not, yeah, we can't. So get licensed here first. Are you near the border? Are you close?
Well, I am planning on moving somewhere close, so that's
Okay.
why I was asking.
So absolutely, because think about it, Abigail, if you only have a North Carolina license and you're like in Rock Hill, you know, that line is somewhere. And in some cases, it might be straight down the middle of the street. So you show this house, your buyer walks out the front door and says, ooh, what about that house across the street? Sorry, I can't show it because that's in South Carolina. So absolutely being dually licensed, having your license in multiple states is absolutely a thing. Just contact that state's real estate commission to find out what you need to do. Some of you
Okay.
may be close to Virginia too. Anybody close to Virginia? You may want a couple of you may want to consider it. Again, guys, cart. Remember, don't put your cart in front of your horse. North Carolina first. Promise me? North Carolina first. Awesome. All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to keep going in Unit 8. How we doing? Less than an hour left to go check-in point. But Dawn, how'd you do that? Oh. If anybody needs me to leave the call open again tonight for the study group to talk, just I'm happy to do so. I just need to know. So I'm usually the last one off anyway, but if you guys want me to leave it open, I'm happy to do so. All right. So let me take attendance. Magic going on. I saw balloons a little bit ago. All right. Let's talk a little bit about how we can cooperate with each other, brokers. First off, there's something called Sherman Antitrust Act. And Sherman Antitrust Act gives us antitrust laws. And the whole point of antitrust laws is to prohibit monopolies. What we mean by that is you can't dominate the market. Like you can't control the market and not let other people in the market to play. It just allows for healthy competition. Specifically, a couple things under the Antitrust Act that applies to us. First up, price fixing. Remind me whose listing, whose buyer it is, who enters into the agency agreement.
The firm.
The firm.
The firm, thank you. If it's the firm's listing, if it's the firm's buyer, whose commission is it? The firm.
Firm.
The firm determines the commission that they want to charge. The firm sets their policy. How much do they charge sellers? How much do they charge buyers? Commission is not set by any association of realtors. It's not set by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Each firm sets their own fees. We need to be very, very careful about this when we're at a listing appointment, for example. Because within that listing appointment, a question the seller's going to have is, how much do you charge? And we need to be very careful how we respond to that. Our response is, my firm charges X amount. If you say something like, all of us in the triad charge the same thing, you just engaged in price fixing. Commission is determined by each firm. So the firm decides how much they're going to collect. And then they also decide how much of their commission they're going to share with you. Never, ever, ever compare your firm's commission to others. Same thing with referral fees. That's a common question I get. Well, how much is the referral fee? That is up to what the firm charges, the firm's policy. Another antitrust act to avoid is group boycotting. Group boycotting is two or more people or businesses coming together for the purpose of driving somebody else out of the market. Let's say, for example, your buyer gets a home inspection and the home inspector didn't do a good job. Maybe the home inspector had a bad day. I don't know, but they didn't do a good job. You, the individual, cannot recommend that home inspector to the buyer after that, the buyer after that. You don't have to keep recommending them. That's fine. What you can't do, though, is show up at the office and look at your peers and say, y'all, this home inspector, let's none of us use him anymore. You've just engaged in group boycotting. You are coming together for the purposes of driving them out of the business. Same thing with real estate firms. Trust me, if the home inspector is bad enough, he will drive himself out. He doesn't need your help. And then the other one is allocating the market or the customers, dividing or separating the market or the customers. I can choose. I just want to do business in Forsyth County. That's the only place I want to work. Forsyth County. I can choose that as long as it's within North Carolina. I can set those parameters for myself. You may decide that you like to work Guilford County. You can do that. We can choose what we want to do. What we can't do is divide that market. We cannot look at each other and say, I'm only going to work Forsyth, you're only going to work Guilford. We're never going to cross county lines. That's dividing the market, allocating the market. I have just as much right to go into Guilford as you have to come into Forsyth. I could wake up tomorrow and change my mind. So again, gee, Julie, what's the big deal? Penalties for violating Sherman's Antitrust Act, you're looking up to $100,000 and 3 years wearing orange, max. Again, the price fixing is the big one for us in practice, is the big one for us. Be very, very careful how you respond to that seller or the buyer. The buyer may ask you too, how much do you charge? Your answer is always, my firm charges X amount. And your firm will let you know that, you'll know that policy. Commissions should be negotiable. Firms should be able, and sellers, buyers should be able to negotiate the commission. How negotiable? It's up to the firm's policy. And all of them are different. Speaking of commission, typically commission is paid as a percentage of the sales price. What's that word of mean in a math problem again? Multiply. We'll see that. We'll probably get to commission math. Well, I know we'll get to it next week. So percentage of the sales price, or maybe they just charge a flat fee, again, up to the firm's policy. Another way to earn a commission, and I put it here because I never, ever, ever remember to talk about it. So another way to earn commission is through something called a net listing. Net listings, the seller agrees. The seller looks at the broker and says, I want to receive X amount. And then the broker is free to set the listing price of the property for whatever they want. And the broker, the firm, will get the difference. Net listings aren't illegal, but they're strongly discouraged because of a potential of conflict. Truth is, if I can make more money for my seller, I have a happy seller, right? And that's what agency is about, is having happy clients, doing things right. So to avoid that conflict of interest, I don't know that we ever see net listings. Typically what we see, most often what we see is a percentage of a sales price. But again, you could have a flat fee. Up to the firm's policy. Earning a commission. How do you get paid? Well, first off, you have to have a current license on active status. We're going to talk about a current license. We're going to talk about active status. We will get to all of that in our license law and commission rule at the end of this class. But for right now, let's just know, if you want to earn a commission, your license needs to be current on active status. And then the second piece of it, you either need to be affiliated with the firm that has the listing agreement, i.e. you're the listing agent, or you're the one that brought that ready, willing, and able buyer. Remember our three-legged stool? Ready, willing, and able buyer. So one or the other. So we have an active current license, or we have that ready, willing, and able buyer, and or. Again, all firms have different commission splits. Remember when you're at your meeting and you're talking to the BICs, another thing you want to go over is what's your commission split? How much of your commission are you going to share with me? What are the fees? They should go over all that with you. Again, if you talk to 2 or 3, you can do a nice side-by-side comparison. So what do you think? This is kind of mean to do this late at night. Going off book for just a second. If your license is inactive or expired, remember we just said it's got to be current or active. So inactive is not active, expired is not current. If your license is inactive or expired, shake your head yes or no. Can you get paid? That was kind of mean, wasn't it? Trick question. The answer is it depends. Here's the deal. If you brokerage the majority of the deal before your license goes inactive or expired, and as soon as your license goes inactive or expired, you stop brokerage activities, you may still get paid a commission. The real estate commission will allow it. It comes down to the firm's policy. So again, the only way you're getting paid on an inactive or expired status is because you brokerage the majority of the deal. You got these people to closing, is what I'm saying. And then your license or close to it. And your license goes inactive or expired. How does it go inactive or expired? We're getting there in license law and commission rule. The firm allows it. You may still be able to get paid a commission. But the key, the trick, you must stop all brokerage activities the moment your license goes inactive or expired. So you wouldn't be able to attend. If the last thing you had to do was closing, you wouldn't be able to attend. Somebody else in the firm would have to go. Questions, Unit 8 so far?
I was just curious on how it would go inactive.
We'll get there.
Okay.
Yep, that's coming at the end. So let's talk specifically about working with sellers. Let's put our listing agent hat on. So listing agents, you get a call. Maybe you know this person, maybe you don't. You get a call. Question comes in, would you still get paid if someone else goes to closing? That's up to your firm's policy. Again, the real estate commission will allow it. It's up to the firm policy if that's going to happen or not. Maria, we always want to make recommendations. Multiple. Here's 2 or 3 home inspectors I've worked with in the past. We're never going to look at a buyer and say, this is the home inspector you're using. So we definitely want to make recommendations. So you get a call from a homeowner. Homeowner contacts you, reaches out to you, and they say, hey, I'm interested in selling my home. Can you help me? And of course, you're off to the side going, of course, I would love the opportunity to help you with that. We got to do some things to get ready for this listing appointment. I always want you guys to remember, anytime you're meeting people you don't know, may that be buyers or sellers, always, always, always remember safety first. Except in this class, we're going to talk about safety last. The very last thing we talk about in this class is agent safety. But always want you to be safe. Do you get this call for, for a potential listing, which means you got to get some stuff together. You got to start learning about the property to get yourself prepared for this listing appointment. To get ourselves prepared, we need to learn as much about the property as we possibly can. We've talked about zoning, DOT, school boards, public or private roads, the GIS, all those things we talked about in the first couple units. This is information I can go online and learn about the property. You can go in the listing service and see you can see a history of properties. So all the times it's been listed before, you can see those listings. If pictures are available, we can see those. Ideally, you guys, by the time you show up for a listing appointment, you know everything about that home except what it looks like right now. The pictures can show me what it used to look like, but I don't know what they've done with it since they bought it. So let me ask you this. You're doing your research. you're looking in the listing services and you're looking at pictures and you make note of a few things. And then you get in the home and you realize the living room's a lot bigger. Gosh, I think they tore a wall down because in the pictures that I saw previously, there was a wall right there and now there's not a wall. Did your flag just go up to ask about permits? You knew they did something, right? But you didn't know that until you walked in the front door. What I'm telling you is to prepare for this listing, we need to go to all those resources, those checklists that your firm and your BIC will provide you, so you can learn as much about the property as you possibly can, except what it looks like inside today. Both broker and seller are gathering information, gathering documents. Those documents can be found page 190 or a few pages into Unit 8. We can ask the seller to provide a copy of their deed. I'm going to go online and look for their deed as well, but I want to make sure the deed I find matches the deed that they provide me. I want to make sure all those grantors, all those people that need to sign to convey the property are on board to list it, and their spouses are on board to list it. Because if somebody doesn't want to sell and they don't want to sign the listing agreement, I guarantee you they're not going to show up on closing day. And you just wasted all that time and energy. So we want to make sure we know the people. We want to ask the seller if they have a copy of the survey from when they bought. Not necessarily to share it with a buyer, but more so to help me know the lot dimensions. Are there any easements on the property? Sellers can help us provide homeowners information, homeowners association information, so covenants, that kind of thing. I'm telling you, a good buyer's agent is going to ask for the covenants. So sellers can help provide us with those for us to share. And then the balance due on the seller's mortgages, we're going to ask in the listing agreement for approximate balances. Again, let's go back to Unit 5. You guys remember lien priority? All those people that were standing in line with their hand out waiting on the seller to sell so they could get paid. I want to make sure that once all those people are paid, there's still money left. If the seller's underwater, it means they owe more than the property is worth. So I want to know early, can they afford to sell? Foreclosures and short sales are coming in our financing units, 14 and 15. Things that the broker can provide. Again, we're looking at zoning, we're looking at DOT, we're looking at the GIS, we're looking at the tax bill. I can look up the tax bill and see if you're delinquent on your taxes or not. That could be another lien on the property if you have outstanding taxes. So we're gathering, learning, getting all this information so we can help the seller list the property for the price that they want. So you get ready for that meeting, either when you're having the conversation about the meeting or when you first get to the property. What I'm telling you is early on, we need to do our working with real estate agent disclosures, because that seller needs to know, I don't owe you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. Competitive listing appointments are very much a thing right now. You may or may not know that you're in a competitive listing appointment, but the seller needs to know. If you don't hire me, if you hire somebody else, anything you share with me today, and I later bring the buyer, I have a duty to share it with them. So caution the seller about how much they say. Also make sure we have this conversation about material facts before we start learning too much about the property, reminding the seller that they don't have to disclose anything, material facts, but we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. I want you guys prepare for every listing as if it was a competitive listing. whether you know it's competitive or not. What I'm telling you is I need you to take your A game every single time. Let's say I look up and I see LaJoy. So let's say LaJoy is going on a listing appointment for a property tomorrow, and I'm going on an appointment for a listing of property the day after that. LaJoy and I are different firms. We don't know that she's going on the listing. I don't know that she don't know that I'm going. We're just going to do our thing. I show up for the listing appointment and I'm like, asking the sellers, do you know your zoning? Has DOT mentioned anything about widening this road out here? What's your school district? LaJoy shows up and says, zoning, school district, DOT. LaJoy's done her research. LaJoy has done her homework. Who is going to get that listing? Hint, not me, because she did her research, her homework, investigated and learned as much about the property before she got there. Take your A game every single time. You don't know if it's competitive or not. So we do our working with real estate. Again, if first substantial contact happens when you're on the phone making the appointment, stop and do your disclosure. If not, when you get to the listing, shortly after you walk in the front door, let's go ahead and do our disclosure so the consumer knows that I don't know you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. So now you've been hired. We have an agency agreement. We got to start getting the property ready. We got to get some information. Oftentimes, agents will tell you that listing a property, most of the work is done up front before you ever see it on Zillow or Realtor.com, because we got to gather the information to put it on the site. So we want to inspect the property. We want to ideally walk around the property with the seller, noting red flags, things that stand out to us. Because guys, if you're seeing it, isn't a buyer's agent going to see it and ask about it? So let's go ahead and address this stuff now. I can make recommendations for repairs. You can get a landscaper out here and clean up the front yard. Curb appeal is huge. I can make suggestions and recommendations to make the property look more sellable. Does the seller have to do anything I suggest or recommend? No. All I'm doing is making suggestions on recommendations. We got a listing data sheet that we need to prepare. It's just like a checklist where you go through and note various features about the property, so you can take it back and put it in the system to load it. I know this sounds awful. This is so bad to say. But after a while, they all start running together. And you start asking yourself, now, were the arched doorways in this house, or were they in the other house I looked at earlier this week? I know that sounds horrible, but after a while, trust me, they all start running together. And if you don't have some kind of data sheet notating the features of that home, you're going to get home, sit in front of your computer, and you're going to be like, okay, was that the house with the ceiling fans, or was that another house? So just make notes while you're standing there. We got to ask the sellers about any recent renovations or repairs, construction. If so, did you pull permits? Ask if they're on public sewer or on-site septic system. How many human heartbeats per bedroom on an on-site septic system? 2. Yep. It's interesting to me how many sellers don't know if they're on public or on-site. How many times they'll say, oh, I don't know. Go tell them to go get their most recent bill from the city. And if they're being charged for sewer, they're on public. If they're not, they're on an on-site septic system. That's the easiest way to get to the bottom of that. So we can ask for copies of that. If it is on the on-site septic system, remember, we can only advertise the number of bedrooms allowed on the septic permit. So if you have what looks like could be a 4-bedroom house, but the septic permit says 3, you're going to mark it as a 3-bedroom with an office or a 3-bedroom with a bonus room. You're not going to market it as a 4-bedroom. We're going to talk to the seller what our marketing plan is. How are you going to market and advertise it? Are you going to do an open house? Do they want you to do an open house? Not all sellers want buyers tramping through their house on Sunday afternoon. So do they want you to do an open house? How are you going to market other than putting it in the listing service and social media? I mean, that's what everybody's doing. So what are you doing to stand apart, to be different? Again, you're trying to win this listing. And then we got to help the seller, we're going to help the seller determine square footage, total heated living square footage. We're going to look at that a little bit more in just a minute. I don't know if we'll get to it tonight or not, but we're going to talk more about determining that total heated square footage. So there's a lot to do. And this is just a very basic, generic list. But we can kind of get here that we're trying to gather all this information, and the seller's helping us. I mean, right? We're all working together to sell this property. When the open house homes are furnished, is that typically done by us as realtors? So some realtors will do their own staging. There are staging companies out there that will do it. So you may want to, if you have a warehouse full of furniture or something, then you're off to or access to furniture, you're off to a good start. Vacant homes sell too. So I'm going to say it depends on the price point. It depends on the property. It might depend on the seller. But I do think staging helps. Just don't go overboard, because we want a buyer to walk in the front door and imagine themselves living there. So one thing we're going to ask the sellers to do to get ready for the listing is to depersonalize, take down the personal. It's awfully hard for a buyer to imagine themselves living there when they're looking at pictures of your kids, your family. So guys, they got to pack anyway, right? So go ahead and start depersonalizing now. I sell space, not stuff. And if there's too much stuff, it's hard to see the space. So have these conversations with sellers. Buyers sometimes have a hard time seeing things for what they can be. Buyers walk in the room and be like, "Oh, I don't like this blue wall. I'm not buying this house." We laugh, but I'm telling you, I think sometimes they have a hard time seeing for things that they can be. So the more we can neutralize and depersonalize, we kind of giving them a blank slate, right? So then they can come in and create their own space. But again, the seller's under no obligation. They don't have to clean anything. They don't have to do anything, but it's going to be a lot harder for me to sell if they don't cooperate. I may not be able to give them as much money. Value's in the eye of the beholder. And if the buyer doesn't see the value through the stuff, it's hard to get the seller what they want. So have these conversations with the seller. Straight out tell them, if you clean this up and pack that up and take these pictures down and get the landscaper out here, we probably get you a little bit more money, on the higher end of the range. Questions on any comments on any of this? You still haven't listed it yet, by the way. You're just, you're gathering information. So earning a fee as a buyer's agent. Again, you got to have that current and active license. You have to be in a valid, here it is, written buyer agency agreement. Remember what you are owed in an oral buyer agency agreement. That's really easy to remember, right? 0. So we have a written buyer agency agreement, and you're the one that brings that ready, willing, and able buyer. In a typical transaction, when the listing service is used, when an agent is hired and the property goes in the listing service, the seller will pay the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever brings that ready, willing, and able buyer. You have access in the listing services. When you log on and you look up 123 Main Street, it tells you right there what they're offering to pay you when you bring that ready, willing, and able buyer. 3-legged stool, all 3 pieces are required. Specifically, let's see. If you are using dual agency, can you double dip and have a commission from the sale and the buyer's fee? That's going to be up to your firm. If you are paid differently in a dual agent versus a co-broke transaction, how differently? Do you get more? Do you get less? That's all up to the firm's policy. Look at you trying to engage me in price fixing. No, but that is that is up to the firm's policy, how they'll pay you for that. Buyer's agents, again, the success fee, as the name implies, you have successfully helped this buyer buy, so they're offering you the success fee. We'll see that in our buyer's agency agreement next week. Firm may also allow you to charge a retainer fee. With a retainer fee, a portion is paid up front. If you close, more than likely it'll be credited back at closing. If you don't close, and at least you've collected something for your time, your energy, the wear and tear on your vehicle. This is important because I look at y'all looking at me. Whether or not you charge a retainer fee, first off, is up to your firm's policy. The firm has to allow you to charge a retainer fee because remember, whose money is it? It's the firm's. Nobody can pay the individual agent because that's not who the relationship is with. So the firm has to allow it. The other thing, if the firm allows you to collect a retainer fee, you must have a written buyer agency agreement. You cannot collect a retainer fee on an oral buyer agency agreement. Again, we'll see this when we look at our buyer's agency agreement next week. And before we leave tonight, I'm going to show you guys where those agency agreements are. So if you want to look over them this weekend, that would be good. So splitting of fees, the co-brokered sale. Co-brokered sale is two firms. ABC has the seller, XYZ has the buyer. How you're going to get paid as a buyer's agent is going to be advertised. The MLS is that listing services that I keep talking about. We're going to officially meet that soon. But the MLS is the listing services. The commission is determined by the listing firm and the seller. Part of our listing agreement, our agency agreement, the seller says, I agree to pay the firm X amount. And then we're going to agree how much we're going to share with whomever brings the buyer. It's an agreement between the seller and the listing firm. Can be negotiable, should be negotiable. How negotiable? That's up to your firm's policy. At some point in that listing appointment, the seller's going to ask, what do you charge? When you say my firm charges X amount, the next question out of their mouth is going to be, will you reduce your commission? And how you respond to that is per your firm's policy. As we said, if it's an in-house sale, dual agency, firm's policy will dictate how each agent will get paid. That's where your independent contract or agreement comes in, contract or agreement. Your independent contractor agreement will let you know how much the firm's commission they're going to share with you. Not seeing this as much anymore, but we may have co-listings, which two or more brokerage firms share a listing. I think the best example of when we see a co-listing is if you have a property that's like it's like in that no man's land between the triad and the triangle, for example. So you may get one firm to list it in the triad, another firm to list it in the triangle, right? You may also see co-listings when you're dealing with like a $1.5 million property. Whether or not two firms are going to agree to share is up to the firms. And our commission and how our firm's commission is handled is regulated. 93A-6 is license law. That's state law. 58A.0102 is commission rule. Again, just here for reference. What license law says is that the provisional broker, soon to be you guys, cannot receive compensation from anybody other than your affiliated firm, your affiliated broker in charge. The only commission you can receive is from your affiliated BIC. 58A takes it a step forward further and says all brokers are only paid through their BIC. So if you're a buyer's agent and your buyer becomes interested in a new construction, and maybe the builder is offering a $500 bonus for all executed contracts by the end of the month, that $500 bonus has to funnel through your firm. How much of that $500 are you going to get? Is it all of it or a portion of it? That's up to your firm's policy. But it's got to funnel through them because it's their commission, their bonus. So any of us, PB, full broker, we can only get paid from our firm, directly from our BIC. Questions? So now let's talk about, we got several different types of listing agreements, several different things going on, and we're going to talk about each of these. The full service listing agreement, is that there? We got several different types of full service listing agreements. They're offering all the services, the bells, the whistles, the open house. I'll put it in MLS. I'll put a combo box on it. I'll show it. If a buyer pulls in the driveway and calls a number on the sign, I'll make arrangements to show it to them. We're going to talk more about, we got different types of full service listing contracts. So we'll break those down in just a second. We're also starting to see more and more limited service listing firms, limited service listing agreements. These are agency agreements. The firm is limiting the services, but not the duties. The firm still owes the seller old car, but they're limiting the services. And usually the way most of these are created, these limited service listing firms charge like a la carte. So you select the service and this is what I'm going to charge you. I'll charge you X amount to put it in the listing service. I'll charge you X amount to put a combo box on, X amount to do an open house. It's all a la carte pricing. So the firm provides like a menu and says, what do you want to order? What products do you want? And that's how much they're charged. Again, careful. They're limiting the services, not the duties. It's still an agency agreement and they still owe the seller old car. Also remember group boycotting. These are not discount brokers. They are limited service listing firms. They offer the services and the duties, just not the same way. They're thinking outside the box a little bit. And then protection agreements, we'll see that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So let's talk about our full service listing contracts. We're offering all the duties and the services, all the bells and whistles. This is what we see the most often of these full service. And we got three different types of these. The first one is the open listing, in which the seller hires multiple firms, but they only have to pay whomever brings the buyer. They're not going to pay you if you don't bring that buyer, if you're not the selling agent. So they could hire 5 firms and not pay any of those firms if somebody else brought the buyer. And to make it even more interesting, the seller retains the right to sell it on their own and not pay anybody. Maybe the seller goes to work and they're in the break room and the coworker says, "You got your house for sale. I've always loved your neighborhood." Seller says, "Well, I'll sell it to you." What did the agent have to do with that? Not much. Okay, before y'all get too excited, simmer down. Before you get too excited, these are not allowed in most MLSs. in most listing services. It's an open relationship. That's right. The seller's dating, they're playing the field, aren't they? They're dating multiple firms. These are not allowed in many MLSs. Obviously, they're still out somewhere. But your bigger areas, Triad, Triangle, Charlotte, Raleigh, Wilmington, Fayetteville, Asheville, you're not going to see it there. This will probably be the last time, and maybe an answer choice on a test question. Once you get out of pre, this will be the last time you see open listing for the most part. I feel comfortable enough saying that. Everybody feel a little bit better? I see you guys getting upset. Like, why would I list with 4 other firms and not even? That might be part of the reason why they're not allowed anymore. I feel like they're still somewhere though, right? Maybe a smaller market. We're still talking about it. That's one type of listing agreement. One type of listing agreement. Another type of listing agreement is called the exclusive agency listing. Exclusive meaning how many firms? Don't look, just show me. Exclusive meaning how many firms? Just one. The seller's only dating one firm. That firm will only get paid if they bring the ready, willing, and able buyer. If somebody else brings it, they won't get paid. And the seller retains the right. I'm sorry, when any broker, correct what I just said. That firm will get paid when anybody brings that ready, willing, and able buyer. So one firm, if another broker brings a buyer, we get paid, but the seller still retains the right to sell it on their own. Think about how tricky this can get. Let's say you list something today and your seller is out. You put your sign in their front yard today. The seller's out this weekend mowing their yard and a buyer stops and says, hey, you got your house for sale? I think both parties have a good argument about who procured that buyer, right? Was it the seller's marketing or is it the agent's marketing, or the seller out there mowing? So this seller retaining the right to sell without obligation to the firm can get very tricky. Again, good news. This is allowed in MLSs and listing services, but in all my years, I've never seen one of these. I have never seen one of these out in the wild. They're allowed, and I don't know who would use them or why. Again, once you get through these exams, you'll probably never see this again. But if you do, you can say you did. So what's the one we like? What's the one that we use day in and day out? The exclusive right to sell. Exclusive meaning how many firms? One. The exclusive right to sell saying you get paid no matter where the buyer comes from. Did you bring the buyer? Guess what? You get paid. Somebody else bring the buyer? Guess what? You get paid. Did the seller bring the buyer? Oh, yes, you get paid. Is this the one we like? Do we feel better? Exclusive right to sell listing agreement, what we see the majority of the time. So what I have, this is in the online learning system. Again, when we get near the end and we're back reviewing all this, I think this is helpful. The money signs means you get paid. So in an open listing, you're only going to get paid when you bring the buyer. An exclusive agency, you get paid if you bring the buyer. If another broker brings a buyer. Exclusive right to sell, you get paid, you get paid, you get paid. And that's what these are about. They're all full service. They all offer all the services and the duties. The big difference is when you get paid. Questions? You guys have your chat set to private? I don't think we've done this yet tonight, have we? Better get one in real quick. Some days my chat log is 3 or 4 pages. Sometimes it's like 25. Just depends. Yes, absolutely, Maria. The firm determines if they want to use the exclusive agency, the exclusive right to sell. I know, again, most MLSs say no to the open, so that wouldn't be up to the firm. But yep, depending on the firm. Everybody got your private chat set? So tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Everybody in? So Devin begins marketing her new listing, which her office has the sole right to market. Sole meaning how many other people are involved? How many we're dealing with sole? Just one, right? So we have something exclusive. Everybody with me? Sole meaning one. Seller decides to sell the property directly to their cousin without going through Devin and avoid the obligation to pay a commission. The type of listing that Devin and the seller have, they have an exclusive agency agreement. Had they had an exclusive right to sell, Devin would have gotten paid. But Devin's not going to get paid, which means she's got an exclusive agency. Yep. So it's B. That's the difference in the two exclusives. The seller retains the right to sell on their own and avoid paying the commission. Let's look at another one. Then we'll wrap it up. A, B, C, or D. Ben? So Thomas lists a property and begins marketing it. The seller sells the property directly to a coworker after talking to them about it in the break room. Despite Thomas's limited involvement, his firm is still owed a full commission. This type of agreement was most likely, I didn't narrow it down between A and C because we know the sellers are not on the obligation to pay. But even though Thomas didn't do anything, don't be Thomas. limited involvement. They're still getting paid, and that's what the exclusive right to sell listing agreement says. Questions? Don't go anywhere just yet. Any questions? So let's talk about next week. Next week, we're going to finish up Unit 8. I encourage you to look ahead at the unit. We've got math coming up next week too. So we had a, few weeks or so break, but we're going to look at that, the end of Unit 8. Once we finish Unit 8, we're going to get through Unit 9. I'm telling you right now, the trick to Unit 9 is the vocabulary words. Units 9 and 10, we get into contract. So 9 is basic contract law, whether real estate's around or not. It's just how a contract works. And Unit 10, we're going to get specific into our offer to purchase and contract, our sales contract. Please, guys, remember me saying Units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. So we won't get through 10 next week, but we'll get started on it. I also wanted to, if we look ahead just a bit in the Unit 8 material in the online learning system, there's that slide I just showed you, so you can go back and review that. I also have our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. I've got some highlights in here. We're going to talk about the highlights. If it's highlighted, it's mentioned in the syllabus. And remember what we said. If it's in the syllabus, it's a good candidate for your state exam. So we tried to help. I encourage you guys to look over the entire listing agreement, but specifically the highlights are what we're going to address. And then also in the Unit 8 material, we have the exclusive buyer agency agreement. Again, with highlights, they're highlighted because they're in the syllabus. So we'll look at these. I do encourage you to look ahead. What else? Questions or comments?
Well, Julie, I'm sorry. For chapter 9, you said the terms.
Yeah.
Heavily on the terms.
Yeah. Because in chapter 9 or so, we're like the ins and outs of how a contract works. I remember once when we were still in person, had a pre-licensing student say, I had her waking up in the middle of the night talking about 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I said, awesome. That's exactly where I need you to be. So if you're not dreaming about this stuff yet, you will be. You will be. Don't worry. Anything else? You guys have a good weekend. Do something fun. Y'all killed me last weekend. Very few of you did something fun. So just go do something fun this weekend. You can take time for fun. It's okay. You guys we're losing sleep, right? Sleep too. Sleep, fun. It's about balance, right? Y'all have a great weekend. We will see you next Tuesday.